Chapter 506. As soon as Li Zhongxing's challenge ended, the generals and strategists in the tent no longer hesitated. They all stared at Kai Teng like hungry wolves as if he was a piece of juicy pork. Just being stared at by the generals made Kai Teng break out in a cold sweat. He originally thought that these generals of the southern expedition were unwilling to go to war with the Dual Sword Dynasty. However, after Li Zhongxing spoke, their sudden change in attitude revealed the problem. They weren't afraid of going to war with the Shuangjin Dynasty. Instead, they were worried that the crime of going to war with the Shuangjin Dynasty at the northern frontier would fall on their heads. By then, no matter who won or lost, there would be rivers of blood on both sides. Whoever started the war would be the sinner. Now that Li Zhongxing had taken on the responsibility, they naturally didn't have any scruples. After all, they were all soldiers. Kai Teng could also understand the attitude of the generals of the southern expedition. If they didn't go to war, how long would they have to endure before they had the chance to be promoted? Marshal Li, you'd better think this through. The Reflection Frost Dynasty has come with sincerity. As long as you release our people, we can negotiate any compensation you want. But if you insist on not giving way, we'll carve out a path of blood to bring our brothers home even if we have to kill you. Kai Teng swallowed his saliva as he sensed the shocking killing intent from Li Zhongxing. His face turned slightly pale. Putting aside the fact that his cultivation wasn't as good as Li Zhongxing's, even if he could defeat Li Zhongxing in a one-on-one fight, there were still the generals of the northern frontier and close to 1 million soldiers of the southern expedition. What was the difference between wanting to kill his way out of this military camp in his unarmed state? Li Zhongxing stopped and rubbed the tip of his nose. He sneered and said, it seems like young clan leader is afraid? Nonsense. Kai Teng's face turned red again. He suppressed his voice and said, the men of the Shuangjin Dynasty aren't afraid of anything. It's just a misunderstanding between us and the northern frontier. Now that we're willing to apologize, why must Marshal Li be so overbearing? Do you think Marshal Li will still have a good reputation if we fight? Clang. Li Zhongxing flicked the blade in his hand, pointing it straight at Kai Chen as he fiercely said, young patriarch, are you mistaken? Right now, it's the Shuangjin Dynasty that's invading the northern frontier. I'm just protecting the country. I didn't send people to invade the Frost Mirror Grassland to create friction. The Shuangjin Dynasty was the one who started the war. Now you're the ones asking for peace. Young clan leader can't be so naive as to think that we, the people of the northern frontier, have no temper, right? As soon as he finished speaking, the entire tent was filled with chaotic shouts of killing. The northern frontier was slightly better, especially the cities near the Central Plains. At the very least, they could be nourished by the Central Plains caravans. However, the living environment of the northern frontier wasn't much better than the Frost Mirror Grassland. The only thing that could attract the caravans to bring all kinds of necessities to the northern frontier was a large amount of spiritual items and demon flesh. These were precious materials that were worth tens of thousands of gold taels in rich places. Therefore, if the people of the northern frontier wanted to survive, they had to learn how to identify all kinds of spiritual items from a young age. In the process of harvesting spiritual items, they had to fight demon beasts. Therefore, in terms of bravery and bloodthirstiness, the people of the northern frontier didn't lose to the people of the Frost Mirror Grassland. Most of the people following Li Zhongxing were veterans of the southern expedition who had been trained from the northern frontier. The remaining veterans were also the first troops to follow Li Zhongxing. All of them had lived in the extreme north of the Shenwu dynasty. Facing the dangers of survival day after day had never moved these men. Was the Shuangjin dynasty trying to scare them by sending their cavalry in that direction? Hearing the incessant shouts of killing, Kai Shen felt a buzzing in his head. He didn't know where he got his quick wits from, but he gritted his teeth and roared, Marshal Li, I have to admit that your troops are brave, but as the marshal, aren't you being a little too reckless? The enemy of the northern frontier isn't the Shuangjin dynasty, but the Shenwu dynasty across the river. HM? Li Zhongxing slowly raised his right hand. Only then did the shouts of killing stop. Gulp. Kai Shen swallowed, feeling his throat dry. He continued, I think, whether it's the king of the northern frontier or the Dragon King, Neither of them wants to face the Shuangjian dynasty's troops while fighting the Shenwu dynasty, right? Continue to bicker with him. Drag it out for as long as you can. In any case, none of the people who invade the northern frontier will live. Suddenly, Lin Yuan's voice rang out in Li Zhongxing's mind again. Li Zhongxing's lips curled up slightly. He looked at Keishin with a kind expression and laughed. Didn't this marshal say that I'm not qualified to speak with the Shuangjian dynasty? This marshal isn't high enough to discuss this matter with the Shuangjian dynasty. If you really want to talk, then let's wait for 2 days and do as His Highness says. Is that all right? Although Keishin's expression was unsightly, Li Zhongxing was already pointing a blade at him. He naturally knew that he couldn't go too far. Otherwise, this fellow really wouldn't mind fighting with them. After all, the northern frontier's current thinking was that they were protecting their country. The responsibility of starting a war didn't even fall on them. But if they fought, the merits would be theirs. This, Keishin nodded with some difficulty and said helplessly, everyone, let's both take a step back. Before we reach an agreement, we won't ask you to release our brothers trapped in the northern frontier, but we ask that you provide them with supplies. Qin Zifang sneered and said to the general next to him, Hey, Li Zhen, have you ever heard of a burglar breaking into your home and then having to provide him with food and water after holding him down with great difficulty? Never heard of it. Like his name, Li Zhen looked burly and powerful, but he had a sharpness that didn't match his appearance. He didn't hesitate to cooperate with Qin Zifang and said with a smile, In my hometown, when you catch a burglar, you don't even need to send him to the officials. Just beat him to death. Keishin's expression darkened as he looked at Qin Zifang and Li Zhongxing. Before he could say, I've tolerated you for a long time, he felt Li Zhongxing's blade getting closer to his neck. He could only bitterly say, I know this request is a bit excessive, but those brothers can't just eat and drink, can they? Since Marshal Li also believes that this is a misunderstanding, why should we expand the conflict? If it really doesn't work, we can just send supplies to those brothers inside. Is that not enough? Li Zhongxing lightly shook his head and said with a cold face, Before His Highness's decree, your troops are not allowed to advance an inch. Otherwise, we will treat it as a declaration of war. At this point, Li Zhongxing glanced at the smiling Qin Zifang. Seeing that the latter was slowly becoming serious, he said in a low voice, But your troops can give the prepared supplies to me. I will arrange for people to send them to the rear. Keishin's brows furrowed and he couldn't make up his mind. Chapter 507. In the end, Keiteng chose to give in and agreed to send the supplies to the Southern Expedition's camp. However, he also proposed to send some cavalry with good cultivation to transport the supplies. Firstly, he wanted to ensure that these supplies would not be used to support the enemy. Even if the Southern Expedition wanted to take these supplies, they might not be able to kill all the cavalry. If one or two escaped, the two sides might go to war. The consequences were not something Li Zhongxing could bear. Secondly, he wanted to see for himself the condition of the grassland warriors who had lost contact with the Shuangjian dynasty and see if they were still worth saving. After all, they were now asking for peace with the northern frontier. This was equivalent to exchanging real money for the warriors trapped in the northern frontier. It was similar to the trade of people within the Shuangjian dynasty. The attitude of the northern frontier was obvious. Keiteng did not think that the northern frontier's appetite would be small. Even the extremely wealthy Bloodbath tribe would have to fork out a huge sum of money to exchange for the Frost Mirror cavalrymen, not to mention the tribes that the cavalrymen originally belonged to. According to the rules, the tribes that the cavalrymen originally belonged to would have to pay at least 40% of the cost. If this amount of wealth was distributed to the various smaller tribes, it would be an astronomical sum that would suffocate them. Although the Frost Mirror grassland did not lack resources, due to the special living environment, they did not only trade animal meat, spiritual items, and other goods that were widely circulated everywhere. The extra people would also be treated as trade goods. If their own tribe could not afford to raise them, they would be sold to other tribes that had more resources but fewer people. As for their status, it was not a problem that the original tribe had to worry about. As for the remnants of a defeated army, They were clearly not worth the Mirror Frost dynasty's investment. How cruel! The corners of Li Zhongxing's mouth twitched slightly. His eyes were somewhat hazy. As a future top military officer of the Shenwu dynasty, he naturally knew what Ke Teng's actions meant. However, this did not mean that he could understand Frost Mirror's barbaric actions. In his opinion, if his fellow soldiers and comrades had fallen into such a situation, he would choose to save those who might still be alive no matter what the price was. He would also try his best to send the bodies of the dead back to their hometown for a proper burial. Unlike Frost Mirror Man, who regarded his compatriots as a resource and only traded with them when he could gain benefits from it, Frost Mirror Man did. If they were in the same predicament one day, would they be disgusted by their fellow soldiers' actions? After Ke Teng left the camp, Li Zhongxing waved his hand and dismissed all the generals and staff officers in the commander's tent. In order to prevent a troop from becoming the personal army of the commander, Li Zhong carefully divided each troop into different battalions. Every 10,000 men could form a battalion, and each battalion had a battalion commander, a deputy commander, and 3 staff officers. Including the mid-level and low-level officers, any battalion of the 3 armies of the northern frontier could almost snowball into a huge army without falling into chaos. Although the battalion commanders and deputy battalions were all outstanding graduates of the military school of the Northern Frontier Academy, their backgrounds were completely different. Some were grassroots generals promoted by Lin Yuan from poor families, while others were descendants of aristocratic families who had submitted to Lin Yuan. As for the staff officers, one was from the Demon Emperor Association, while the other 2 were guests of Li Zhongxing and Qianhu of the Genie Guards. It could be said that each faction was stuffed into a battalion to check and balance each other. No matter what the characters and abilities of these people were, they all had their own factions behind them. Naturally, it was impossible for them to get along well. After all, everyone had their own interests. Only very few people would believe in feelings and loyalty. Of course, in order to prevent each faction from harming their comrades for their own interests, Li Zhongxing also adopted a system of punishment. For example, once disobeying orders, the battalion commander, deputy battalion commander, and 3 staff officers would not be able to escape. It was fine if it was impossible, but if anyone was determined to drag down the northern frontier, before facing the anger of Lin Yuan and Li Zhongxing, they would still have to wrestle with the other 4 big shots. Unless all 5 of them were determined to betray the northern frontier, just the difference in strength alone was enough to send those disloyal fellows to hell. It was also because of this system of appointment that although Li Zhongxing was nominally the commander of the southern expedition and could mobilize any unit, he could only give a general strategy and detailed battle objectives. The degree of completion and the plan of completion were all discussed by his subordinates. If Ke Teng had not come to the meeting as an emissary of the Shuangjian dynasty, the northern frontier generals and staff officers would never have gathered in Li Zhongxing's tent. Now that the meeting was over, even if Li Zhongxing did not ask them to leave, they would not stay here for long. After all, no one knew when the war would start. If they had the time to chat here, they might as well go back and sharpen their weapons. Dragon King, I'm not doubting you, but I feel that your way of doing things is no different from playing with fire. After everyone had left, Li Zhongxing casually threw his saber to the side and sat down on his tiger-skin chair. He said in a deep voice, "Since you don't intend to negotiate with these barbarians, you shouldn't keep them in suspense. Now that things have come to this, it's really not easy to end things." Lin Yuan's projections slowly condensed in Li Zhongxing's commander's tent. A cold glint flashed in his different-colored eyes as he sneered, "I want to use the fate of these barbarians to tell everyone that no matter what schemes they have behind the scenes, if they don't have the determination to fight to the death with the northern frontier, don't interfere. Otherwise, this king will directly chop off their hands. Do you think it's better to settle things once and for all, or to drag things out slowly?" At this point, Lin Yuan paused for a moment and said, "The Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce has indeed brought in a lot of profits. Before this, it could almost support the simultaneous operation of several projects. But after the war started, 2/3 of the reform and construction projects in the northern frontier were suspended, and all the money squeezed out was used to fund the various troops. Because of this, the various departments still owe the soldiers their salaries. Although the equipment from the Ministry of Works and the Ministry of War has been equipped with all of you, they have only paid you a portion of the cost of the materials. They still haven't paid you the labor fees and salaries. A string of black lines slowly appeared on Li Zhongxing's forehead. Of course, he knew that war cost money, and a lot of it at that. For example, the Shenwu dynasty had been peaceful for decades. Even if the officials were greedy, the treasury was still considered rich. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Lei Qiusheng slept on a mountain of gold every day. But how long had it been since the war on forefront started? The treasury of the Shenwu dynasty had basically been emptied. Chapter 508. After all, you're a general now. You can't think in such a simple way. Theoretically, I should only pay you the salary of the South Expedition Army. Actually, you should be concerned about the expenses and rations of the surrendered troops and captives. However, I still paid the bill for you. As of now, your South Expedition Army is growing larger and larger in scale. Did I tell you to stop? Lin Yuan sat up and said calmly, "Anyway, I don't want to fight the Shenwu dynasty and the Shuangjian dynasty slowly. If you want to let these people go, you will have to fight at the front when the Frost Mirror Barbarian invades next time. Also, don't expect me to pay you a single cent outside of the establishment." The corner of Li Zhongxing's mouth twitched slightly. He held back the swear words that were about to come out of his mouth. He didn't have the national treasury of the Shenwu dynasty that had been peaceful for decades, nor did he have the terrifying beast that was the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. If he had to support an army of millions of people, wouldn't that be asking for his life? But Lin Yuan's attitude was very clear. He didn't want to fight this war. Whoever wanted to fight would pay. Li Zhongxing wanted to complain about this kind of rascal behavior, but he didn't know how to say it. After all, the Southern Expedition's military strength was several times greater than the establishment that Lin Yuan had given him. And as the work of cleaning up the Northern Territory continued, this number was still increasing. When the war was over, they would definitely be dealt with. But Li Zhongxing didn't want to be forced into a dead end because of this matter. If all 500,000 Frost Mirror Barbarian soldiers are lost at the northern frontier, how should we deal with it? Now that the Shuangjian dynasty has taken the initiative to beg for peace with us, it seems that they are prepared to bleed a lot. But not only did the Dragon King not give them face, his actions are no different from starting a war. If they really go to war regardless of everything, it will be no less than a disaster for our northern frontier. Li Zhongxing cupped his fist at Lin Yuan and said in a deep voice, "Am I right?" Li Zhongxing, who was disgusted by Lei Qiusheng's action of abandoning the people in the Northern Territory, couldn't tolerate sand in his eyes now, especially after experiencing the good life of the people in the northern frontier. Li Zhongxing couldn't be said to be loyal to anyone now. The only thing he wanted to protect was the people in the northern frontier who had sacrificed everything for their livelihood. Lin Yuan said that he wasn't willing to go to war with the Shuangjian dynasty, but at the same time, he was provoking the Shuangjian dynasty. He couldn't figure out the meaning behind this at all, so he could only look at Lin Yuan with a confused gaze, hoping to get an answer. If Lin Yuan really decided to go to war with the Shuangjian dynasty at the critical juncture where the Shenwu dynasty was about to launch a counterattack against the northern frontier, then Li Zhongxing would summon those loyal to him to launch a military remonstrance even if it meant risking his life, forcing Lin Yuan to give up this bold idea that shouldn't have existed. The northern frontier alone was enough for them to digest for a long time. Not to mention that Lei Qiusheng still had the strength to spare. Even if he could kill Lei Qiusheng in one blow, the northern frontier wouldn't be able to take down the remaining central plains and southern territories. So Li Zhongxing is right. You still have room for improvement in strategy, but in terms of strategy, you're just a chicken. Lin Yuan looked at Li Zhongxing with pity, helplessly shaking his head and explained, "Right now, we're not the ones fighting a war. I'd rather use these military funds to develop the northern frontier and even the entire northern territory than waste them on such meaningless things. You're also one of the people with the highest status in the northern frontier. You should know how much work we still have to do and how much resources we lack." Hearing this, although Li Zhongxing didn't like the way Lin Yuan looked at him like he was an idiot, he still nodded to show his agreement. If Lin Yuan really was a warmonger, he wouldn't waste time researching the new laws of the northern frontier. He also wouldn't exterminate the sects and then punish the noble families. He also wouldn't take all the land in the northern frontier and rent it to the people for farming at a very low price. At the same time, he would establish the Northern Frontier Academy and a series of huge projects related to people's livelihood, medical care, and other fields. Just by relying on the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce, it wasn't impossible for Lin Yuan to cultivate the northern frontier into a war-loving land where everyone was a soldier. However, Lin Yuan's choice was to slowly develop and gradually reform. Every move might not be beneficial at the moment, but it would definitely be beneficial for the future. If there were really so many resources that he didn't have any place to use them, Lin Yuan would definitely carry out more projects and build more gathering places so that every inch of land in the northern frontier could be used properly. He wouldn't train an army to compete with the Shenwu dynasty. Although it looked like Lin Yuan made the first move, in reality, Lin Yuan's purge of the northern frontier was Lei Qiusheng's idea. The situation had developed to this point because Lei Qiusheng didn't want Lin Yuan to easily take over the northern frontier. It would be best if he acted like a tool and wiped out the rebellion in the northern frontier. After forcing the southern frontier to make a move, he would obediently retreat to his own northern frontier. However, Lei Qiusheng wasn't the only tyrannical person in this world. Lin Yuan, who was able to come up with God's mandate and King's law, was no less tyrannical than Lei Qiusheng. However, Lei Qiusheng didn't have the boldness to lie by the side of the bed and allow others to sleep soundly. From the beginning, he only wanted to use the northern frontier as a test subject for the reform, so that the hostility of those aristocratic families and sects would be transferred to us. However, now that the northern frontier is strong, Lei Qiusheng can no longer let us continue to grow. Once we take over the northern frontier, the speed of our development will definitely rise to another level. At that time, the extremely weak Shenwu dynasty might not be able to be destroyed at any moment, but the outcome would already be determined. Therefore, the battle between the Shenwu dynasty and the northern frontier will happen sooner or later. It's just a matter of waiting for us to be fully prepared before attacking, or Lei Qiusheng taking advantage of the fact that we haven't stabilized our footing yet. For an outstanding military strategist like me, Lei Qiusheng's actions weren't out of my expectations. On the contrary, I didn't expect the Shenwu dynasty to be so weak. Therefore, I'm more and more worried about what kind of trump card he has in his hands. Under these circumstances, our own wishes don't matter at all. Right now, the Reflection Frost dynasty has changed their ways and is humbly begging for peace with us. It's not because of the reasons they've given us, but simply because they don't want to fight. Therefore, whether we teach them a lesson or not, they won't fight. Or rather, they won't choose to fight to the death with us right now. Do you think they will be grateful to us if we let those barbarians go? Lin Yuan's eyes flickered with an obscure brilliance. It was as if he was looking at the Frost Mirror Khan from countless miles away and seeing through his heart. His tone was even more certain than guessing. Chapter 509. Isn't that the case? Li Zhongxing's eyes widened. If all 500,000 Frost Mirror cavalrymen are killed, it'll be a blood feud. Those barbarians will never let it go. They'll have to go to war eventually. Your actions will definitely bring the war forward. Li Zhongxing felt that the more he listened, the more confused he became. It seemed that Lin Yuan was right, but his reason told him that this was all sophistry. Lin Yuan definitely had other plans behind his back. After such a huge feud, even if Frost Mirror Khan didn't want to go to war with Lin Yuan, those tribes would definitely force him to send troops to the northern frontier. After all, only some of them were unlucky now. Once the war started, the northern frontier and the whole Shuangjian dynasty would be in trouble. Even if it was for the survival of their own tribes, most of them would choose to go to war. Frost Mirror Khan is like a wolf. Before they're full, they'll keep following you. When you show a weakness, they'll pounce on you and tear your flesh apart to fill their stomach. If you don't want to, you can only raise your weapons and beat them until they're scared. Only then will they tuck their tails between their legs and show their more dog-like side. They'll stay away from you and won't dare to provoke you for a while. If we show weakness now, the Shuangjian dynasty won't be grateful to us. Instead, they'll think that the northern frontier is only strong on the outside but weak on the inside. After they've healed their wounds, the first thing they'll do is to invade our territory and burn, kill, and pillage. By then, it'll be an endless war. Mirrorfrost had fallen into Lei Qiusheng's trap. Not only were the 700,000 Mirrorfrost cavalrymen trapped in the Central Plains unable to come out, even more Mirrorfrost cavalrymen would be trapped in this deadly trap. Based on this battle alone, I am certain that at least half of the Shuangjian dynasty's border army near the Shenwu dynasty will be destroyed. Apart from the border army, the tribes near the Shenwu dynasty will also lose many young and strong men. Of course, we weren't the only ones who knew that Lei Qiusheng's concession was a trap. The Shuangjian dynasty knew it too. The reason they wanted to make peace with us was to preserve their strength as much as possible so that they wouldn't lose too much of their strength. They might even lose the edge of the Frost Mirror grassland so that their ranch could become our hunting ground. If both sides worked together and the beast tied in the Hengduan mountain range, the Shuangjian dynasty might not even be able to recover from the setback. Speaking of which, if we can't determine the victor between us and Lei Qiusheng, then we need a way out. Therefore, the Shuangjian dynasty's invasion this time is a way for us to ease our relationship. At that time, we can choose to call a truce and head north together to collect this debt of blood from the Shuangjian dynasty. Then, we can return to our respective territories and start accumulating strength for the next war. But this time, if we sign a truce, we won't have an excuse to head north to attack the Frost Mirror grassland. Naturally, we can't join forces to attack the Shuangjian dynasty. Even if we shamelessly call a truce, the other dynasties won't just stand by and watch us attack the Shuangjian dynasty. If they cut off the trade with the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce, we won't even have a place to cry. So, they only need to withstand the pressure from Lei Qiusheng. Lin Yuan narrowed his eyes slightly and smiled. I don't want the northern frontier to fall into a two-sided war. I just want to tell these barbarians one thing. The northern frontier will never back down from a fight. As long as they want to fight, I'll fight with them. Plus, there's a special tribal system there. Before we can catch our breath, Shuangjian Khan's throne will probably change hands. Do you think that Shuangjian Khan, who has dominated the grassland for 50 years, will do such a profitable business for a bunch of dead people? This, Li Zhongxing's eyes widened even more. He said with a puzzled expression, since the Shuangjian dynasty has already seen through the trap, won't they know to withdraw and wait for the right opportunity? They'll attack us when we fight with Lei Qiusheng. No matter who they help or whether they fight on both sides, they'll still benefit from it. That's what we need to do. Fan the flames, add oil, let this fire burn even more fiercely. Let the Shuangjian dynasty suffer the greatest loss and force them to swallow their anger. The coldness in Lin Yuan's eyes slowly faded and turned into an obscure emotion. I'm slow-witted. I don't understand what the Dragon King means. Li Zhongxing shook his head with a bitter smile. However, he was sharp enough to smell the blood in Lin Yuan's words. In the end, weren't they still going to fight? Sophistry indeed. The loss of 500,000 Frost Mirror Barbarian is not an unacceptable loss for the Shuangjian dynasty, because the number of young men who die from the cold, starvation, or being killed by demon beasts on the grassland is far more than that. However, for some tribes, the loss of these young men is a disaster. They won't accept this result easily, so they'll do everything they can to recoup their losses. For example, 500,000 Frost Mirror Barbarian died on the northern frontier, but 700,000 Frost Mirror Barbarian killed and looted as they pleased in the Central Plains. If they want to recoup their losses, do you think it's better to start a war with the northern frontier, or go to the Central Plains, where they think it's incomparably prosperous, and even plunder for a while more in the south? If we show enough strength, the Shuangjian barbarian will wisely choose to avoid us and hold this grudge in their hearts for the time being. However, in the current situation, their first choice is still to plunder the Shenwu dynasty. This wise decision is what both Lei Qiusheng and I want to see. The only ones who want to stop them are the higher-ups of the Shuangjian dynasty. However, the tribes that have suffered losses won't let go of such a good opportunity, especially the small and medium-sized tribes outside the range of Frost Mirror Khan's influence. Even if they pretend to be obedient, they won't let go of such a fat piece of meat like the Shenwu dynasty. Lin Yuan's voice trembled as he said, Lei Qiusheng used the bones of countless people to build a path to victory for himself. In this aspect, he's even more of a bloodthirsty demon beast than this king. But you also said that the Shuangjian dynasty already knows that this is a trap. Before Li Zhongxing could finish his words, his face turned pale and he swallowed dryly. He suddenly realized that Lin Yuan, this demon beast, knew more about the situation of the various factions than he, a professionally trained officer, did. The unique tribal system of the Shuangjian dynasty was no different from that of the demon beasts in the Hengduan mountain range. However, the Beast Lord Kirin could intimidate countless demon beasts, but the old Frost Mirror Khan didn't have such strength. Although he was revered as the king of the grassland, the small and medium-sized tribes outside the range of the Blood Liao tribe's influence had never obeyed Frost Mirror Khan's orders. Chapter 510. The harvest of 700,000 Frost Mirror Barbarian in the Central Plains was enough to make most of the Frost Mirror tribes jealous. It was also enough to drive the tribes that had suffered heavy losses crazy. Even if the Frost Mirror Khan ordered them not to enter the Shenwu dynasty's territory, they wouldn't listen. Lin Yuan's act of killing 500,000 Frost Mirror Barbarian was equivalent to pouring oil on Lei Qiusheng's trap. The fire that wasn't strong enough to begin with instantly engulfed more than half of the Frost Mirror grassland. And this was an overt scheme. Unless the Shuangjian dynasty was willing to start an all-out war with the northern frontier, they could only choose the seemingly weak Shenwu dynasty. This king isn't as ruthless as Lei Qiusheng, but this king loves his own people more than Lei Qiusheng. Lin Yuan finally regained his composure and said with a smile, no one knows what Lei Qiusheng's trump card is. This king doesn't want him to use it on the northern frontier. It's better to send him more Frost Mirror Barbarian. When he can't hold on anymore, he'll naturally reveal his trump card in advance. I know what to do. Li Zhongxing nodded with a serious expression. No one knew what Lei Qiusheng's trump card was, but in this situation, unless Lei Qiusheng went crazy, he definitely had something that could change the situation in an instant. Letting Lei Qiusheng use this thing on the Shuangjian barbarian was obviously much better than using it on the northern frontier. Although he didn't like this kind of scheme, it wasn't his own doing. However, this wasn't his doing, and it was indeed for the sake of the entire northern region. Therefore, even if Li Zhongxing didn't like it, he could only persuade himself to accept and even obey. The next morning, Kai Yen led 30 Shuel Yao cavalry and 200+ carriages of supplies, his face solemn as he arrived at the Southern Expedition's scouting area. After yesterday's meeting, Li Zhongxing had no intention of stopping him. Very quickly, he led the 5,000 light cavalry to the front of the formation. Marshal Li looks a lot more energetic. Kei Fan rubbed her hands together. She had dark circles under her eyes, and it was obvious that she hadn't rested well. In fact, Li Zhongxing had also gone through a lot of mental struggles last night. But after thinking it over, she still decided that Lin Yuan's actions were the most beneficial for the northern frontier. It was also the best way to break Lei Qiusheng's trap. At the very least, it was the method with the least losses. So, for the latter half of the night, Li Zhongxing didn't continue to brainstorm with herself and fell asleep peacefully. But looking at Kai Yan's appearance, Lei Qiusheng knew that this young clan leader of the Greenfish tribe didn't have a good time after returning home yesterday. The arrogant and unreasonable Shuangjian dynasty had lowered their proud heads, but they didn't get the respect they deserved from the northern frontier. The situation they were facing was completely different from what they had expected. Not only did the northern frontier not show the slightest bit of fear, they even seemed to be full of fighting spirit. But even if the northern frontier wanted to fight, the Shuangjian dynasty didn't. They only wanted to preserve their strength and wait until the northern frontier and the Shenwu dynasty had a decisive battle before coming to take advantage of the situation. There was no need for them to help that bastard Lei Qiusheng fight the vanguard after falling into his trap. At least, that was what the generals of the Shuangjian dynasty convinced themselves. But according to Kei Yan's report, the northern frontier didn't plan to release the captives immediately. They wanted to send the message back and wait for the reply from the northern frontier prince's mansion before deciding on their next move. Before that, they couldn't even send their supply wagons past the southern expedition's position. They could only send some cavalry to accompany the southern expedition to transport the wagons. In the words of those scholars, the behavior of the northern frontier was no different from being shameless when they were given face. But they couldn't do anything because, just as Lin Yuan had predicted, the Shuangjian dynasty didn't plan to fight this battle. So, they could only vent their anger on Kei Yan, the envoy. As a result, Kei Yan looked like he was going to collapse at any moment. Li Zhongxing glanced at Kei Yan and said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I didn't expect young clan leader to be so knowledgeable about the situation of our brothers trapped in the northern frontier. 500,000 Frost Mirror barbarian soldiers wasn't a small number. These 200 wagons of supplies were only enough to fill the gaps between their teeth. Although the defense line of the northern frontier wasn't that tight, the intelligence network formed by the Association of the Demon Emperor's members and the embroidered uniform guards wasn't something that the Shuangjian dynasty could infiltrate. So, the Shuangjian barbarian soldiers who were still defending the plains definitely hadn't made contact with the main forces. So, Kei Yan's 200 wagons of supplies were just a pretense. At the same time, it was also to express his distrust of the northern frontier. Kei Yan smiled helplessly and wiped the sweat on his forehead. He said with an apologetic smile, "Marshal Li must be joking. Just by looking at your southern expedition, I know that the northern frontier's army isn't ordinary. We know our own strength. How could those good-for-nothings be a match for your northern frontier's army? Let alone 500,000, even if they had 200,000 left, they would be burning incense to thank the gods." At this point, Kei Zhuo paused for a moment before continuing, "We're just going to take a look at the situation today. Although the supplies we brought are better than nothing, they should be able to last for half a day. Once we confirm the situation, we'll be able to make preparations." Li Zhongxing expressionlessly pulled on the reins and turned his horse around. He said coldly, "I'll say the ugly words first. Your cavalry had better behave themselves. If they do anything inappropriate, I have the right to kill them on the spot. Also, after confirming the situation, you can prepare for the next shipment, but all of your cavalry will have to come back with you. Do you understand this?" "Understand my ass?" Kei Yan's face suddenly darkened. He didn't expect Li Zhongxing's slap to come so quickly and so suddenly. They had prepared such a small amount of supplies in order to annoy Li Zhongxing and make his men make a few more trips. Of course, there was no lack of distrust in Li Zhongxing. They were worried that the southern expedition would seize too much of the supplies, which would be considered an act of aiding the enemy. But Li Zhongxing's attitude was also very clear. "You don't trust me, and I don't trust you. You think I'll seize your supplies? I think you're using this method to increase your troops." But then again, both sides were just trying to annoy each other. They didn't really suspect each other of doing anything. After all, the supplies were only enough to fill the gaps between Li Zhongxing's teeth. Even if Li Zhongxing seized them, they would only be able to fill the gaps between their teeth. With the troops around him, they could eat all 200 carriages of supplies in 1 or 2 meals. Although the dozens of cavalry were all in the late stage of the airborne realm, such a small number of people was definitely not enough to increase the number of troops. What was the difference between increasing the number of troops in such a scale and sending them to their deaths? Chapter 511. "Marshal, what should we do with the Frost Mirror cavalry that came with us?" A light rider rode up to Li Zhongxing, a faint murderous intent flashing across his fair face. The fair-skinned young general was a graduate of Qiao Yu's batch. However, unlike Qiao Yu, who was known as Black Bear, due to his simple and honest nature, Qiao Yu was known as the Black Bear, which made him the type of general who would charge and break through enemy lines. On the other hand, the fair-skinned young general, Zhang Xiuzhu, was more of a scholarly general. His training was decent as well, having reached the pinnacle of the airborne realm before the age of 30. He was only one step away from reaching the celestial star realm. Li Zhongxing was also one of the military mentors of the Northern Frontier Academy. Qiao Yu and Zhang Xiuzhu were both students that he thought highly of. Although they had their own shortcomings and were not as good as Qin Yu and Zhao Guangchong, who were taught by Lin Yuan and were able to lead troops to the south as soon as they graduated, he still wanted to get closer to Li Zhongxing. To be fair, Zhang Xiuzhu was not worse than the students taught by Lin Yuan. He could become a famous general after some training. However, his biggest weakness was hatred. Zhang Xiuzhu's parents were both civilians. They did not even have the ability to move to other places to live, let alone have the ability to cultivate. Therefore, every year when the Frost Mirror Barbarian raided the border, Zhang Xiuzhu and his parents could only rely on luck to avoid being killed. However, luck would always run out. When Zhang Xiuzhu was 7 years old, the Shuangjian dynasty raided the border. His parents were killed by the sword, and only the young Zhang Xiuzhu escaped by hiding in a secret cellar at home. Since then, the seed of hatred had been planted in Zhang Xiuzhu's heart. Lin Yuan set up the Northern Frontier Academy and supported poor students. This was a great opportunity for Zhang Xiuzhu, and he did show his extraordinary talent. Compared to the children of aristocratic families who grew up with spiritual objects, Zhang Xiuzhu, who started cultivating in his 20s, could not achieve much. However, there was no limit to human perseverance and potential. Zhang Xiuzhu, who had a blood feud, was far more hardworking than the other students in the same batch. His cultivation, the art of war, and even strategy were all excellent in almost every subject. However, when everyone thought that Zhang Xiuzhu could win Lin Yuan's favor and become the most dazzling star of the Northern Frontier in the future, this guy rejected Lin Yuan's olive branch without hesitation and went straight to the main camp of the Southern Expedition. From Zhang Xiuzhu's point of view, it was impossible for the Southern Expedition Army to continue south in a short period of time. However, the cleanup work in the north still had to continue. Apart from those clans that were still stubbornly resisting, the Frost Mirror Barbarian cavalry that pillaged the border would be the Southern Expedition Army's main opponent for a very long time. And Zhang Xiuzhu was indeed capable. After a series of tests, Li Zhongxing believed that this guy, who was not much younger than him, would become the most dazzling star of the Northern Frontier in the future, even if he rejected the recruitment of the so-called Star General class. Therefore, even though he knew that Zhang Xiuzhu was currently on the Southern Expedition, he would divide the Southern Expedition in the future and take part of the people to form a new army to wrestle with the Shuangjian barbarian. Li Zhongxing gladly accepted Zhang Xiuzhu as his disciple and even trained him as his successor. However, Zhang Xiuzhu's performance in the past 2 months had indeed proved that he deserved Li Zhongxing's favor. In response to this proud disciple's question, Li Zhongxing only raised his eyelids and said through secret voice sending, "The Shuangjian dynasty has 35 cavalry with them this time. Apart from the heavy military supplies we have, you can only take 50 people with you. How do you think we should deal with them? Kill them." A cold light bloomed in Zhang Xiuzhu's eyes as he replied without hesitation. Li Zhongxing was silent for a while. Zhang Xiuzhu scratched the back of his head and said with a smile, "Marshal is not a person who makes arbitrary decisions, but with your authority, it's not impossible for you to let the Shuangjian barbarian go. However, you chose to stall for time without discussing with us. This action already shows that Marshal has no intention of letting those barbarians go. Moreover, you're not the only one who has an opinion on this matter." Li Zhongxing smiled non-committally. He just waved his horsewhip gently, indicating for Zhang Xiuzhu to leave. Just as Lin Yuan had said, Li Zhongxing was a chicken when it came to strategy. His current actions could only deceive the Shuangjian barbarian. However, those in the Southern Expedition with discerning eyes could see that Li Zhongxing, who had always followed the advice of others, had chosen to use stalling tactics to cut off the Frost Mirror Barbarian's chances of survival. It was obvious that someone was guiding him behind the scenes. And although Li Zhongxing was the king of the Northern Frontier, he only had the authority to make suggestions. He did not have the authority to directly command the commander-in-chief of the Northern Frontier's 3 armies. If it was Li Zhongxing's idea, then Li Zhongxing would still have to discuss it with them before deciding whether to do it or not. That was why the entire southern expedition was so quiet. No one argued with Li Zhongxing like Li Zhongxing did with Lin Yuan. The reason was very simple. Most of them were already scared out of their wits by Lin Yuan. Lin Yuan had never tasted defeat since his debut. Therefore, they could not see the depth of Lin Yuan's decision. Even if they could see it clearly, no one would overestimate themselves and ask Lin Yuan to correct it. When Zhang Xiuzhu gradually rode away, Li Zhongxing once again said through secret sound transmission, "Just say that it was my idea. Go to that place and pick a group of ruthless people to go with you. First, lead them around in circles. After you have shed all pretense of cordiality, you must do it cleanly. Don't leave any hidden dangers." Speaking up to here, Li Zhongxing paused and smiled. Besides that, Wei River City has been breached, and there are still over 100,000 reserve troops of the Divine Forest Army gathered near Tsangtao City. We can't clear them out for the time being, but we have to let these Frost Mirror barbarians vent their anger, right? This general will not disappoint the Grand Marshal. Zhang Xiuzhu pulled on the reins and turned his head to look at Li Zhongxing. His white face squeezed out a bright smile. As for how to use these 200 carriages of supplies to provoke the conflict between the Frost Mirror Barbarian and the Shun Lin Jun reserves, he had already outlined a rough plan in his mind. At the same time, he also guessed what Black Jiao, who gave him today's position and opportunity, was planning. Kai Ting stared blankly at the two people's lips moving. He subconsciously felt his heart sink. But when he listened carefully, he could not understand what they were talking about. Although they were speaking the common language of Tianwu continent, the words they spat out were all numbers. For someone like him who did not know the code of the northern frontier, it was no different from listening to a heavenly book. But his keen sense of danger still made him feel that the southern expedition was secretly planning something. Chapter 5:12. Young clan leader, why are you in a daze? Li Zhongxing urged his horse to the side of the hesitant Kai Teng and lightly poked him with the end of his whip. Only then did Kai Teng wake up from his deep thoughts. His entire body seemed to have been startled, and cold sweat began to appear on his forehead. That was my favorite student, but his personality is a little weird. He doesn't know how to speak the common language of the Sky Marshal continent, so we were using a special secret signal to communicate. I told him to go back and pick 50 capable brothers to escort you on this trip. Is there any problem on your side? Kai Ting finally calmed down. When he looked at Li Zhongxing again, he discovered that he was smiling warmly. Gently shaking his head, Kai Ting forced himself to calm down and said, "But I heard that the northern frontier isn't very peaceful right now. Can 50 people really escort the supplies safely to the destination? Why don't we discuss it again and have both sides send more people?" When he heard the number 50 people, the stone in Kai Teng's heart slowly fell. After all, the cavalry of the northern frontier couldn't be compared to the cavalry of the Shuangjian dynasty. Even the horses they rode were inferior war horses bought from the Shuangjian dynasty. Even if their cultivation was higher, 50 people against 35 people might not have more than a 50% chance of victory. And even if they could defeat them, it was impossible to keep all 35 of them at the northern frontier. As long as one or two escaped, the northern frontier wouldn't be able to take it. Even Kai Ting, who had always believed in his intuition, felt that he was being too cautious and even a little oversensitive. Li Zhongxing lightly shook his head and bitterly smiled. To be honest, although there are many hidden dangers in the northern frontier, the real threat is the Frost Mirror Cavalry and Shun Lin Jun's reservists that we couldn't completely eliminate. With your people here, even if we bump into the Frost Mirror Cavalry, they won't do anything. And if we encounter those reservists, even 2,000 people won't be able to do anything. But if the number of people is smaller, the target will naturally be smaller, and it will be much safer. Kai Teng stared blankly at Li Zhongxing. Shen Lin Jun was the trump card of the Shenwu dynasty, and was also the trump card of Lei Qiuxing's dragon throne. Even the reservists were quite a formidable existence. Furthermore, Wei River City, which was known as the Impregnable Fortress, was also a famous existence. But now, the reserve force of the Divine Forest Army had been defeated and even Wei River City had been breached? What kind of monsters were these people? Thinking of this, K Teng's last trace of hostility towards the northern frontier completely dissipated. He bitterly smiled and said, "If that's the case, then we'll do as the Grand Marshal wishes. I'll go inform them to prepare to depart." Although the men of the Shuangjian dynasty didn't lack courage and bravery, the special living environment still made them have the personalities of wolves and dogs. Just as Lin Yuan predicted, the stronger the northern frontier displayed, the more the Shuangjian dynasty didn't want to provoke the northern frontier. But K Teng, who was just about to leave, suddenly remembered something. He abruptly pulled on the reins and said, "Our 13th prince was deceived by the Shenwu dynasty some time ago and led his troops into the northern frontier's territory by mistake. It's been almost half a month since then. I wonder if our 13th prince is a guest at your residence?" Although the third prince speculated that the 13th prince was dead, the proud Shuang Jianren didn't think so. In their eyes, the northern frontier was just a group of nouveau riches. They might not even be able to withstand the counterattack of the Shenwu dynasty. How could they offend the Shuangjian dynasty at this time? Therefore, even if the 13th prince went on a killing spree in the northern frontier, he only needed to announce his identity after he was defeated. Not only would the northern frontier not dare to touch him, they would even treat him as a guest of honor and wait for the Shuangjian dynasty to take him away. "Young master, you must be joking. I haven't heard any news about the 13th prince." The warm smile on Li Zhongxing's face instantly disappeared. He said coldly, "I will write another letter to ask the northern frontier's residents. However, I advise you not to have any delusions about this matter. You know our Dragon King's personality. The Shuangjian dynasty has sent troops to invade the northern frontier one after another. If they don't pay a price, they will lose face." This, K Teng originally thought that taking the 13th prince out was just a matter of convenience. After all, they could let the 500,000 Frost Mirror barbarians go. If they let a few more people go, they wouldn't be criticized. However, Li Zhongxing's cold attitude was telling him to stop dreaming. The Shuangjian dynasty would definitely pay a price for these two invasions. Between the 500,000 Frost Mirror barbarian and the 13th prince, he could only choose one. "I still have military matters to attend to. Farewell." Without waiting for K Yen to quibble, Li Zhongxing cupped his fists and urged his horse to rush towards the army camp. "He's trying to sow discord." When Li Zhongxing disappeared from sight, K Teng threw the horsewhip in his hand to the ground. Between the 500,000 Frost Mirror barbarians and the 13th prince, this was a choice that even a child could make. However, when it came to K Teng, he couldn't make up his mind. Not to mention that among the 500,000 cavalrymen trapped in the north, at least 60,000 of them were Greenfish clan's disciples. The other clans who had lost some of their men were all hoping that their men could return safely. Because of this matter, K Teng, the envoy, was treated with great respect. Gifts that K Teng didn't even dare to think about before were prepared and sent directly to his tent. There were even some tribes that used beauty traps. Their goal was to make K Teng protect as many of their tribe's men as possible. Once Juechi gave up on the 500,000 Frost Mirror barbarian cavalrymen and chose to bring the 13th prince back to the imperial court, he would be tied to the Blood Liao tribe. Once the Blood Liao tribe collapsed, there would be no place for the Greenfish tribe to stay in the prairie. If Kan Shuang had been young, it would have been fine. Unfortunately, Kan Shuang had been seriously injured when he was young. His cultivation had not improved in the past few years, and his body was deteriorating day by day. There was no telling when he would pass away. Although there were many outstanding princes in the Xueliao tribe, the most outstanding ones were the 3rd and 13th princes. Of the two of them, one was a scholar and one was a martial artist. If these two forces could not be merged together, the decline of the Bloodstream tribe would be inevitable. But from what he knew, the relationship between the 3rd prince and the 13th prince could be said to be irreconcilable. However, if K Teng chose the 500,000 Frost Mirror barbarian and gave up on the 13th prince, then what awaited him would be the fury of the Bloodspan tribe. Those tribes wouldn't care about his friendship. In the eyes of the prairie people, they had already prepared a generous gift for K Teng. Teng bringing back their tribe's young men safely was his duty. Only a fool would fall out with the Bloodstream tribe in order to protect Teng. Chapter 5:13. Shenwu Dynasty, Imperial Capital. Lei Qiusheng paced back and forth in Yangxin Palace with his hands behind his back. He glanced around the empty palace with a gloomy face. The entire Yangxin Palace was filled with a gloomy atmosphere. Anyone who got close to the palace would find it hard to breathe. Lei Qiusheng's plan had only begun to work now. After opening up the borders, the border army under his command retreated to the central plains. Although they might not be able to confront the Frost Mirror cavalry head-on, they could still defend the imperial city and the nearby cities. Before the war began, Lei Qiusheng had already ensured his own safety. However, the northern frontier did not have such a good condition. The northern battlefront army was still in the north. Most of the soldiers in the southern battlefront army were new recruits. Even the old soldiers were just average. They were much weaker than the elite soldiers in the border army. The only force that could give him pressure was the Fallen Star army that Yan Xingqi had trained. But the number of soldiers was too small. In a large-scale battle where more than 1 million soldiers were involved, what could 5,000 soldiers do to him? Lei Qiusheng could never imagine that any army in the northern frontier could fight the Shuangjian barbarians' main force head-on. Therefore, when he knew that the Shuangjian dynasty was approaching Donglin City, Lei Qiusheng was so excited. He wanted the Shuangjian dynasty to charge in and destroy the entire northern frontier. Then he could clean up the mess. However, the Shuangjian barbarians stopped. Their main forces didn't act like before, recklessly charging into the northern territories to burn, kill, and plunder. Instead, after encountering the Southern Expedition Army that Lei Qiusheng deemed to be unable to withstand a single blow, they suddenly stopped advancing. Both sides even began to communicate. If the Shuangjian dynasty reached a peace agreement with the northern frontier, it would be a terrible nightmare for him. After all, his trump card was still in the preparation stage. If the northern frontier lost the Shuangjian dynasty's restraint, not only would they be able to quickly annex the entire northern territory, they could even deploy a series of battle plans along the river, waiting for his army to smash their heads and bleed. That's right, his head was broken and bleeding. Although he felt that the army at the northern frontier was mediocre, they were from the Shenwu dynasty and not the Qingjiang dynasty, which had the best navy in the world. Letting his meticulously trained divine martial heavy steps cross the Wei River to fight was equivalent to throwing iron cans into the Wei River. Who can tell me what the situation is in the north? Without Zhang Xiu, is your embroidered guard all trash? Lei Qiusheng's gaze swept across the shadows of the Hall of Mental Cultivation as he roared angrily. If I had known that the embroidered uniform guard was only at this level, I would have let the Servants' Administration take over the Northern Intelligence Network. Do not challenge this monarch's patience. You must send me the latest intelligence on the north within 4 hours. Furthermore, all of this monarch's orders must be completed with the highest priority. Understood. As you command. Several feeble voices rang out from the shadows. The embroidered uniform guard's intelligence network in the north had not been disbanded, but due to Lei Qiusheng's suspicious nature, the original officers had all been purged and replaced, regardless of whether they were loyal to him or not. There was no lack of spies that he had personally placed by Zhang Xiu's side. Changing generals at the last minute was a huge taboo in the army. Coupled with Lei Qiusheng's bloody purges, the entire embroidered uniform guard felt insecure. They couldn't even guarantee their own safety, so who would focus on gathering intelligence and establishing a spy network for him? Moreover, in this kind of intelligence network, there were often hundreds or thousands of spies lying dormant in a single command. Only by extending this network could a complete and mature intelligence network be formed. Zhang Xiu had transferred away a group of loyal higher-ups of the embroidered uniform guard, and Lei Qiusheng had purged them himself. Currently, it was unknown how many spies were in contact with the embroidered uniform guard but didn't have official identities. After all, their command lines were already gone. Who could verify their identities? Under such circumstances, the current situation of the embroidered uniform guard wasn't as simple as just rotting away. It was even on the verge of collapse. Lei Qiusheng still had delusions that the embroidered uniform guard could maintain the powerful operational capabilities that it had when Zhang Xiu was still in power. This was no different from a fool's dream. Of course, this kind of intelligence network was different from the military system. At the very least, the bloody purge of the higher-ups had shocked most people. There wouldn't be an army mutiny. As long as there was enough time, the embroidered uniform guard's original structure could definitely be restored. However, if he wanted to restore the all-pervasive scouting ability of the North, he would have to ask the Shifter Emperor Council and the embroidered uniform guard if they were willing to do so. Since you knew it would be so troublesome, why didn't you kill it back then? When I dealt with Zhang Xiu, I had the opportunity to kill it. It was just a matter of convenience. A black shadow flashed, and the shadow that was supposed to be overseeing the south slowly appeared behind Lei Qiusheng. Lei Qiusheng shook his head lightly and said bitterly, "The Black Jiao is indeed a difficult opponent, but it cannot die. At the very least, it cannot die now, and it cannot die at our hands." The shadow raised its eyebrows imperceptibly, as if it was curious about this statement. With the Black Jiao as the representative of the northern frontier, the Black Jiao has already set its sights on those top powers. Because of the previous incident, the Black Jiao has shown the ambition and ability to replace me. Those top powers are definitely begging for it. Otherwise, why do you think the chaos in the Shenwu dynasty has continued until now? Isn't it just those guys who are creating opportunities for the Black Jiao and stalling for time? In addition, the relationship behind the Black Jiao is also complicated. Forget about the ancient demon court, whose real identity is unknown. Anyway, it can establish a relationship with the top powers. Even if its identity is fabricated, it doesn't matter. However, its current identity is the Lord of the Northern Frontier and the Beast King of the Hengduan Mountains. It is also inextricably linked to those dragon blood demons. All the forces are trying to rope it in. If the Black Jiao dies at this time, not only will the Northern Frontier go out of control, but the Sea Demon Rebellion in the south and the Hengduan Mountains will also take revenge. Even the Frost Mirror Dynasty and the Qinjiang Dynasty will try to take a step further. Lei Qiusheng put his hands behind his back, exhaled a turbid breath, and said in a cold voice, "The Black Jiao was born as a demon beast. This is its natural disadvantage. On the other hand, we are just people who killed our master and usurped the throne. We are not much stronger than it. The other 6 dynasties have been trying to find ways to balance the other forces for so many years. They will not tolerate a usurper like me to continue to exist." Got it? The shadow nodded slightly. He did not understand Lei Qiusheng's thoughts, but as the shadow of Lei Qiusheng he only needed to obey the order. Chapter 5:14. Forget it. Let's not talk about this. A cold glint flashed across Lei Qiusheng's eyes as he said, "Although the cultists' invasion into the south this time is unexpected, if we use it well, it will be of help. At least the blame won't be directly placed on us. That plan can be started. Once I have a definite order, release them immediately. The south isn't ready yet. Moreover, this is the reason why we fell out with the top powers this time. If we reveal our strength now, it'll be no different from drinking poison to quench our thirst. Although we can resolve the Frost dynasties and the North's problems, the top powers definitely won't tolerate us anymore. In fact, they might even interfere directly with this matter." The shadow took a deep breath and sighed. Moreover, the evil cult's life in the south is not good enough. They are not powerful enough. If we force them to be blamed, it will not be justifiable. There is no other way. Even if we don't want to fall out with those top forces, with their existence, we are no longer on the same side. It is only a matter of time before we fall out with them. Therefore, we don't need to hide anything from them. We just need to explain it to those who have not been in contact with this circle. It is not that I am greedy for power, but after all, the follow-up plan needs a lot of manpower and material resources to be implemented. The Shenwu dynasty can't be given up now. At least, we can't give up before we reach the first stage of the plan. Lei Qiusheng shook his head gently and sighed. The Shuangjian barbarian now thinks that we are weak and can be bullied. Our previous plan not only failed to suppress the northern frontier, but also shot ourselves in the foot. Should we ask the border army to take action? The shadow looked serious. If there are too many Frost Mirror Barbarian coming in this time, it will not be good for our recovery. We don't have to go all out. Ask the border army to expand the protection area. We have to protect at least half of the territory in the Central Plains. At the same time, open up a path for Frost Mirror's cavalry to go south. Although those guys are on our side, they are also hungry wolves. Without a large number of blood sacrifices to make them happy, even I can't tell what will happen. Lei Qiusheng's lips curled up slightly as he sneered, "Not long after, the Shenwu dynasty will return to my rule. I can even swallow up half of the Shuangjian dynasty. After recuperating for a few years, I will turn around and swallow up the Qinjiang Empire. When that time comes, I will monopolize half of the world. Who can stop me?" The shadow nodded slightly and disappeared into the shadows again. Although the scheme is good, it's a pity that there will be endless troubles in the future. Lei Qiusheng put his hands behind his back and sighed. If I hadn't been prepared, the Black Jiao would have been in a general's position. Now, it's fine. The more people that come, the happier they will be. No one liked the feeling of being pressured step by step. Even Lei Qiusheng, who had expected this to happen, felt the same way. How could he not know that it was not time for those things to be exposed? If he could use the Shuangjian barbarian to defeat the northern frontier, that would be the best plan. However, with the embroidered uniform guards being replaced and the ether collapsing, not only would the intelligence agencies in the north become dim, but even the intelligence agencies in the south would be dragged into the quagmire of war. In the huge Shenwu dynasty, the only thing that was under his control was the Central Plains, which was run by the shadow. Therefore, Lin Yuan had schemed under his nose and led a large number of cultists to the south. This was something that he had not expected at all. He had been prepared to use the Shuangjian barbarian as a feint, waiting for the northern frontier to be exhausted before mobilizing the border army to take back the northern territory in one fell swoop. Because of all these arrangements, he could not sit back and watch the south collapse into the hands of the cultists. He could only cooperate with Lin Yuan's rhythm and lead the Frost Mirror Barbarian to the south, letting the barbarians fight with the interest groups in the south. In the hotbed of war, the cultists who preached that they were the representatives of the gods who saved the world would naturally find the best hotbed to grow their strength. Unless the barbarians used the power of the entire dynasty, they would not be able to eliminate the cultists with just a portion of the border army. The difference in strength between the two sides would rapidly shrink and then magnify. When the entire south fell apart, he would use the name of the cultists to release them. Then he could send all those who held him back or did not listen to him to hell. When they were full, they would naturally be in a good mood. At that time, he would appear and communicate with them. Then he would put on a show and drive them into the northern frontier or the territory of the Shuangjian dynasty. Not only would he be able to recover his territory, but he would also be able to completely reshuffle the cards and make the bloated dynasty his say in the future. What interest groups in the south? What northern frontier? In the eyes of Lei Qiusheng, they were just a bunch of tools. Ever since he got in touch with them, his vision and structure had long surpassed his own level. Moreover, he had the special existence of the shadow at his disposal. Naturally, he would be successful in doing things secretly. This time, the four major forces joined forces to attack the Shenwu dynasty because some disobedient fellows among them were discovered. This matter attracted the attention of the top forces, and they asked Lei Qiusheng to release all the restrictions and let them search. However, Lei Qiusheng, who had a guilty conscience, was naturally unwilling to agree. Therefore, the drama of the four forces attacking one was born. Although the top forces didn't have any evidence, those people knew how terrifying they were. Not to mention seeing it, even if it was just a groundless rumor, they would quickly investigate the situation. If there were any signs of something wrong, they would directly kill them. If that fellow hadn't reacted quickly and retreated with them, there would be no survivors in the entire Shenwu dynasty now. According to the original script, Lei Qiusheng would be the biggest loser, and Lin Yuan, Lei Qiusheng, and even the combined forces of the aristocratic families, which were not as powerful as the northern frontier, would become the winners and begin to divide this fat cake. However, among these people who had already gained benefits, except for Lin Yuan, Lei Qiusheng didn't have the intention to put the others in his eyes. His real opponents had always been those high and mighty top forces. At least, this was Lei Qiusheng's plan at the moment. Moreover, the development of the matter was slowly moving in the direction he had envisioned. However, no matter whether it was the reaction of Lin Yuan or the top forces, Lei Qiusheng was an uncontrollable variable. Even if he was lucky enough to make use of the evil cult members introduced by Lin Yuan to talk about the matter, in an attempt to delay the time for the top forces to intervene in this matter, there were several changes in the cards in Lin Yuan's hands that he couldn't figure out in any case. Chapter 5:15. On the northern plains. The Shuangjian dynasty's supply wagons had already set out for quite some distance. Even from the highest watchtower in Donglin City, one could only see a small shadow of the convoy. It wouldn't be long before the convoy completely disappeared from their sight and stepped into the undercurrent of the conflict between the three factions. "How should I address you, General?" Keizhua urged his warhorse to catch up with Zhang Xiuzhu, who was at the front of the group, and asked with a chuckle. Keizhua preferred the 13th prince over the 500,000 Frost Mirror cavalrymen, but he knew very well that no matter which answer he chose, it was the same as choosing death. The only difference was that one would be executed immediately, while the other would be a delayed death. The only way he could find to survive was to find a way to stay on the northern frontier after this matter was over. If things didn't work out, then he would choose the 500,000 Frost Mirror cavalrymen and hide in the northern territories for a period of time. He would return to the plains after the Bloodsill tribe had declined. Even if he lost everything he had now, it was still better than losing his life. At this moment, Kei Ting finally understood why the third prince had given him such a lucrative task, and why the people of the large tribes had mocked him. He hadn't thought much of it when he had received the generous gifts, but now it seemed that these fellows had clearly regarded him as a dead man. If he wanted to survive, he had to curry favor with the northern frontier by hook or by crook in exchange for a period of protection from the northern frontier or a permanent residence on the northern frontier. Because of her nervousness, she urgently needed someone to talk to. Secondly, Keijua's abilities lay in his cultivation and horseback. If he wanted to make a living after joining the northern frontier, he would have to walk the path of the army. Although Zhang Xiuzhu wasn't conspicuous yet, someone who could gain the favor of Li Zhongxing would definitely have great achievements in the future. That was why he chattered so much in order to make himself known. It could be said that he had put a lot of thought into it. Zhang Xiuzhu glanced at Keizhua and rolled his eyes. He didn't say anything. He didn't have a good impression of the Shuangjian barbarian to begin with. It was already good enough that he didn't draw his sword. Furthermore, Li Zhongxing had set him up as a reclusive person who didn't know how to speak the common language of the Tianwu continent. Under such circumstances, unless he had no other choice, he naturally wouldn't speak. Although these Shuangjian barbarian were already food in his mouth, he wouldn't disregard the big picture for a little personal grudge before he was completely confident. Moreover, it was obvious that Li Zhongxing had reminded him of an opportunity that could bring even greater losses to the barbarians. Why wouldn't Zhang Xiuzhu do it? However, these Shuangjian barbarian couldn't all die in the ambush. At least 2 or 3 Frost Mirror barbarian had to be released before they could return to pass on the news that Li Zhongxing wanted the Shuangjian dynasty to know. The supply convoy had been ambushed by Shen Linjun's reserve forces, and the convoy was almost completely wiped out. When the time came, Li Zhongxing would take the opportunity to remove the checkpoint and find a way to lead these Shuangjian barbarian to meet the real Shen Linjun's reserve forces. Including the 500,000 Frost Mirror barbarian, whose fate was already sealed, Zhang Xiuzhu had to use his great willpower to suppress himself so that he wouldn't laugh out loud. This time, the 49 knights following Zhang Xiuzhu weren't professional soldiers from the northern frontier. Some of them were hired wanderers, and some were cultivators that the Shifter Emperors Association had recruited from the Mercenary Union and the Demon Subduing Masters Association. However, most of them were trained by Luo Su of the Embroidered Uniform Guard. In terms of cultivation, these 49 knights were not inferior to the carefully selected Frost Mirror Cavalry generals. Moreover, their past experiences had given them a few more abilities than the Frost Mirror Cavalry generals, who rarely moved around in the mountains. In terms of stealth, concealment, and tracking, even if the Frost Mirror Cavalry generals had 10 times the number of them, they still wouldn't be able to compete with them in a battlefield that they were familiar with. Therefore, once the situation became chaotic, even if they ran into Shun Linjun's reserve forces, about 80% of them could survive. If they were lucky, they might even be able to escape from the ambush site with a few survivors. However, Zhang Xiuzhu still needed time to come up with a general plan of action. Although some of the Frost Mirror Cavalry generals had to return alive, who would live and who would die was still a matter of consideration. For example, Juechen, who was the messenger, would definitely take up one of the spots. The guy who was wearing an ordinary general's armor but was surrounded by several Frost Mirror Cavalry generals probably had a powerful background as well. As for the rest of the spots, Zhang Xiuzhu would have to consider carefully. After all, although the idea of an ambush was proposed by the northern frontier, the scapegoat would definitely be the Shun Linjun's reserve forces. Therefore, the more people from the Shuangjian dynasty survived, the more credible the rumor that Li Zhongxing's spread would be. But similarly, if all the important people survived and the ones who died were just cavalry generals, the Shuangjian dynasty would naturally become suspicious. They might even take this opportunity to launch a war directly to see the truth of the northern frontier. Therefore, Zhang Xiuzhu needed time and space to observe the situation and determine the status of the Frost Mirror Cavalry generals so that he could decide who would survive. According to the plan, the ambushers should be Zhang Xiuzhu's own people who had seized equipment from Wei River City. However, for the sake of realism, once the two sides engaged in close combat, even their own people would not hold back. If they were unlucky or not strong enough, they would die in vain. War had always been this cruel. Moreover, no one knew when the ambush would begin. Therefore, Zhang Xiuzhu's team leader had to arrange everything properly before the ambush happened. For example, he had to arrange at least 3 or 4 people around the valuable Frost Mirror Barbarian. Once the battle started and the situation was not good, they would immediately cover the enemy's retreat. After all, they were all on the same side. Once the battlefield was divided, the brothers would not die even if they were captured. In order to ensure the implementation of the plan, Zhang Xiuzhu had even prepared a plan to completely wipe out. Fortunately, the people he brought with him were all elites. They did not have any combat strength or reaction time problems. As long as Zhang Xiuzhu gave the order, or if things deviated from his expectations, they would be able to react immediately. For a scholarly general, like Zhang Xiuzhu, he only needed to be a wise man. Naturally, they would carry out the plan in a way that maximized their benefits. It was just that with Ke Zhuo constantly chattering in his ear, not to mention that Zhang Xiuzhu's heart-nurturing kung fu had not yet reached the great accomplishment stage, even if he could reach the stage of being indifferent, it would still be difficult for him to ignore Ke Zhuo, who was like a fly. Helplessly, he could only give an officer next to him a look. Chapter 5:16. The latter immediately understood and welcomed him with a smile. Young clan leader, please don't make things difficult for our team leader. He's still familiar with this area and we still need him to lead the way. If he gets distracted and takes the wrong path into the deep mountains and forests, we'll all become food for the demonic beasts. Besides, our leader doesn't speak the common language. We're the only ones who can communicate with him. If you have anything to say, why don't you tell me? I'll pass it on to both sides later. The officer quickly pulled Ke Ting away from Zhang Xiuzhu with a warm smile on his face. Never in his wildest dreams would Ke Ting have imagined that this smiling fellow was actually one of the famous torturers of the Imperial Secret Service. Who knew how many skins he had personally peeled off, not to mention how proficient he was in other cruel methods of torture. But just this smile alone made Ke Ting, whose heart was in turmoil, feel a deep sense of security. At this moment, the two of them were undoubtedly chatting happily, as if they were close friends who were talking and laughing as they walked further and further away. Zhang Xiuzhu looked at the backs of the two people as they disappeared into the distance. Then he faintly sighed and said in his heart, "Why don't I just kill them? It's so annoying to always have a fly by my side." The group advanced for another 4 hours. They were less than half an hour away from the Frost Mirror Cavalry's encampment. However, Zhang Xiuzhu, who was at the front of the group, suddenly raised his right hand. In that instant, whether it was the cavalry or the supply troops, they all stopped in their tracks and carefully drew their weapons. The Frost Mirror Cavalry, who was already suspicious of these northern frontier people, was shocked. They also drew their weapons. But the targets of the two sides were completely different. The northern frontier people were guarding the dense forest in front of them, while the Frost Mirror Cavalry were guarding against these people from the northern frontier. After a few breaths, the Frost Mirror Cavalry realized that the people from the northern frontier people weren't targeting them. But even though they were embarrassed, they didn't put down their weapons. They were still on high alert, as if they were worried that the people from the northern frontier people were putting on a show. They were waiting for them to lower their guard before attacking. "General, may I ask what's going on?" Kai Ting whispered to a few of his trusted generals. Then, he rode to the front of the formation to ask about the situation. "There are no beasts in the forest. Even a startled bird wouldn't fall. What do you think is going on?" Zhang Xiuzhu glanced at Kai Ting and said something in code, which the genial officer passed on to Kai Ting. According to the original plan, there would be an ambush on the way. But the location of the ambush surprised Zhang Xiuzhu. This place was only a few minutes away from the Shuangjian dynasty's military camp. As long as they passed through this dense forest, they would enter the open plains. Then, they would arrive at the place where the Frost Mirror Cavalry was gathered. If the commander of the Divine Forest Guard wasn't an idiot, he wouldn't have set up an ambush in such a place. After all, if the commotion caused by the battle had attracted the attention of the Frost Mirror Cavalry, these starving fellows would quickly realize that there were no armed forces from the northern region in this dense forest that blocked their path of retreat. It was just a little more troublesome to travel. After passing through this forest, they would be able to reach Eastwood City, and then return to the Frost Mirror Plains through the main road there. Letting the Frost Mirror Cavalry see a way out was a small matter. After all, most of the troops in the Northern Territory had gathered here, and the encampment wasn't too far away. If the Frost Mirror Cavalry gave up on their mobility and entered the forest, they would lose at least 40% of their men before they could make it to the other end of the forest. Furthermore, there was a group of troops from the Southern Army blocking their path. When the pursuers met up with the Southern Expedition, they would be able to surround the Frost Mirror Cavalry and take them down. The only thing they had to be careful about was that if the two groups of Frost Mirror Cavalry encountered each other, they could use their mobility advantage to surround the Frost Mirror Cavalry. It was hard to say whether the Frost Mirror Cavalry would be surrounded by the northern frontier or the Southern Expedition. Therefore, the ambush in front of them either had the confidence to take them down in an instant, or it was really an ambush. Moreover, it was an ambush that didn't know the current situation. Of course, the ambush wasn't the obedient rebel army of the aristocratic families punished by Li Zhongxing in the north. It was the real Shinlin Jun's reserve force. Although these guys ran out of Wei River City, they didn't take any supplies with them except for their armor and weapons. If it wasn't for the food stored in the underground tunnel, many of the hundreds of thousands of people would have starved to death. In any case, this show was most likely real. The camouflage troops had either been eliminated or were waiting for their prey in a further place, or they had been set up by Li Zhongxing on their way back. It was just that this ambush was a little too amateurish. Not only did they clear the entire forest of wild beasts, they didn't even chase away the birds above them. Anyone who didn't know anything about the art of war or didn't pay attention to the details would definitely choose to go around this forest and choose another path. Were these guys really the elite Shinlin Jun's reserve force? Zhang Xiuzhu reached out and patted his forehead. His face was gloomy as he raised his right hand and gently pressed it forward twice. According to the organization of the northern region, A heavy wagon was equipped with 4 civilian laborers and 2 auxiliary soldiers whose fighting strength was not as good as the frontline troops. However, Li Zhongxing had long replaced the civilian laborers and the auxiliary soldiers with the good soldiers of the Southern Expedition Army who did not look like much. Now they had 85 generals with good fighting strength and 1,200 elite soldiers at their disposal. It sounded good, but if they really encountered the hundreds of thousands of Shen Linjun's reserve force, it would be no different from delivering food to them. In fact, without the protection of seniors like the Fallen Star Army, Zhang Xiuzhu felt that even if they encountered a group of defeated soldiers, even if the difference in numbers between the two sides wasn't that big, their chances of winning were really low. After all, the ordinary soldiers of Shen Linjun's reserve force were basically equal to most of the Frost warriors on the battlefield. The Northern Frontier's reserve force might have more elite soldiers, but the difference wasn't that big. As for the combat strength of those elite soldiers, in a battle of this level, it was almost negligible. Fortunately, not many people noticed that something was wrong. Following Zhang Xiuzhu's order, a group of 10 elite soldiers instantly broke away from the formation and entered the dense forest in front of them with swords and shields in their hands. Soon, they were blocked by the dense weeds and tree trunks. Zhang Xiuzhu turned his horse slightly, closed his eyes slightly, and began to count silently, 1, 2, 3. Chapter 5:17. 15 breaths. Zhang Xiuzhu's eyes suddenly widened. He raised his right hand and made a fist. The elite soldiers who received the order immediately overturned the supply wagons beside them. They used these not-so-sturdy wooden wagons to build a temporary and simple fortification. Then, they raised their swords and shields and hid behind the supply wagons. Zhang Xiuzhu and his brothers also dismounted and retreated to the back of the fortifications. Clearly, the Mount Frost generals weren't too happy about this. After all, they spent most of their time on horseback. If they dismounted and fought these northern frontier soldiers on foot, they wouldn't even be able to last one round. They wouldn't even have the chance to escape. On the other hand, Kei Teng, who had been whispering into Zhang Xiuzhu's ear, jumped down from her horse and hid behind the fortifications. Many Mount Frost generals rolled their eyes at her. Bush, bush, bush. Before the Judgment Frost cavalry could reprimand them, the sharp sound of something tearing through the air rang out. Before the 34 Frost Mirror Riders could react, 11 of them were shot down by the volley of arrows. The rest of them also had a few arrows stuck in their bodies. Although the arrows weren't fatal for a short period of time, they still affected their mobility. This volley of arrows had basically crippled half of the Frost Mirror Riders' combat strength. As for Zhang Xiuzhu and his party, who had long anticipated this, they were practically unscathed. Most of the arrows were nailed to the supply wagons, while a small number of arrows were blocked by the shields. Of course, there were a few unlucky fellows who were still hit by the arrows. Those who were slightly luckier were shot in the arms and calves, which affected their combat strength but wasn't fatal. Those who were unlucky had their heads cleanly shot by an arrow. This time, Zhang Xiuzhu and the others didn't need to waste any more words. The remaining Frost Mirror cavalry immediately dismounted from their horses, which they viewed as their lover, and scrambled into the fortifications of the supply wagons. They began to wail like ghosts and howl like wolves. The Mirrorfrost dynasty only had 2 battle styles. The first was to use cavalry and archers to harass the enemy while slowly trailing behind them. The second was to directly charge forward with the army. They didn't care about losses and only wanted to engage in close combat with the enemy. Of course, aside from the boorish ones, the Mirrorfrost generals who could make the latter battle strategy were basically all confident that they would win. Who are these guys? Kei Teng was trembling all over. His teeth chattered as he spoke. It was so loud that one would worry that he would bite his tongue. Zhang Xiuzhu's lips curled up. A bitter smile appeared on his face. He ordered in code, "Repair the fortification. Move the extra supply wagons to the front. We will wait for 1 or 2 more rounds of attack to see how strong the enemy is." To put it bluntly, there was no first place in literature and no second place in martial arts. Everyone knew that during the time of the Wanjian dynasty, Lei Qiuxing, Yan Xingqi, and their personal guards were all elites in the world and were equally matched. In Lei Qiuxing's dynasty, after a few decades of development, the Divine Forest Army had become the #1 army in the Shenwu dynasty with the title of the world's #1 step, becoming a legend among legends. However, everyone in the northern frontier felt that Lei Qiuxing's era was about to end. A new era that belonged to Lin Yuan was about to begin. Shen Lin Jun, the world's #1 heavy infantry, should have retired from the stage. Who would become the first army in the northern frontier? This was the long-cherished wish of almost every soldier in the northern frontier. They had the northern frontier to defend, the southern frontier to attack, and the experienced and ruthless Starfall. There were also the graduates of the Star General class that Lin Yuan personally led. It was said that they had formed a secret special unit that had yet to be officially revealed. The scale of the southern expedition was too large. Sooner or later, different units would be assigned to different territories. Zhang Xiuzhu wanted to work hard with Donglin City as his goal. Although his real opponent was the Shuangjian dynasty, this didn't stop Zhang Xiuzhu from having the idea of personally training his own troops as the northern frontier's #1 army. Most of the people in front of him now were Shen Lin Jun's reserves. If he didn't even have the guts to challenge the reserves, how could Zhang Xiuzhu still have the face to compete for the title of the northern frontier's #1 army? Even if his troops did become the strongest army in the northern frontier in the future, his concession to Shen Lin Jun's reserves today would fiercely nail him to the pillar of shame. Even if he obtained that title, he wouldn't dare to openly show it. Although most of the people present were not Zhang Xiuzhu's subordinates, they were at the top of the southern expedition's food chain. Naturally, they wouldn't have the idea of directly retreating after hearing the other party's name. Now that Zhang Xiuzhu wanted to stay and fight with the other party, for them, it was something they couldn't ask for more. The other party shouldn't have a lot of people. They are just a defeated army. Zhang Xiuzhu slightly raised his eyebrows and sneered. Although the ambush technique is lame, if it weren't for our quick reaction, they could have leisurely come up and killed us one by one. This level of attack isn't something that can be done by just anyone, so their identity is correct. The only thing that is wrong is the number of people. You mean? Officer Gung quickly took over the conversation, squinted his eyes and said, the other party deliberately covered up their marching tracks and scattered in the territory of the northern frontier. They just want us to focus on their original marching route. But in fact, the people who are still marching along their original marching route are almost all abandoned pawns? Zhang Xiuzhu nodded slightly and continued, also, if they have enough people, they should have come up to fight us at close range after seeing that we have finished building the fortifications and exposed their existence with the rain of arrows. But they haven't done anything yet. I think they are either the allies of the 500,000 Frost Mirror Cavalry, or they don't have enough people and don't have the confidence to fight us at close range. The rain of arrows just now came suddenly and uniformly. Zhang Xiuzhu only heard the loud sound of bowstrings being released. Obviously, these people had drawn their bows, pulled their strings, and released their bows at almost the same time, so the countless sounds converged into one loud sound. This was not something that an ordinary army could do. But Zhang Xiuzhu's command was good, and his subordinates reacted quickly. Even building the fortifications with local materials was only a matter of seconds. This was not something that an ordinary army could do. So even if the other party was Shen Lin Jun's reserve force, they had no choice but to take Zhang Xiuzhu's army seriously. Chapter 5:18. Both sides have about the same number of people. We still don't know who will kill who. Gang Su was obviously not someone who was afraid of trouble. He immediately sneered, how about we organize a counterattack? If they don't want to come out of the forest, we will rush in and play with them. Gang Su was a member of the Genie Guards. He was Yu Dingxian, the one who received the order from Li Zhong. After delivering Li Zhong's handwritten document to Li Zhongxing, Yu Dingxian didn't immediately return to the safe Shunning City. Instead, he chose to stay at the front line to help the southern expedition. Although the ones sent to occupy the source of Wei River were a few subdivisions of the southern expedition, It didn't mean that the main force didn't lack manpower. Based on the current tragic degree of one army against a country, Li Zhongxing's troops had to be at least 3 times more than before to have the capital to be strong. Zhang Xiuzhu gently shook his head and sighed. No matter what, the other side is the world's elite Shenlinjun. Even if they are in the reserve force, they are not much weaker than us. If we rush in and fight with them, it won't be called a war. Speaking of this, Zhang Xiuzhuan paused and smiled bitterly. It's called delivering food. Yu Dingchen, who was originally calmed down by Zhang Xiuzhu, suddenly changed his expression. Even the hot blood in his chest cooled down a lot. Whether he admitted it or not, Zhang Xiuzhu's judgment was correct. After all, since ancient times, soldiers fought soldiers, generals fought generals. No one would give up the identity of a purple-level general to kill a small group of soldiers. In this case, the elite soldiers of the northern frontier were obviously not inferior to anyone. But only Shenlinjun was outside of common sense. This army that was firmly controlled by Lei Qiusheng recruited new soldiers every year. They were not selecting soldiers at all. Instead, they were selecting people who had the qualifications to become generals and bringing them back to Wei River City for training. Therefore, it was not an exaggeration to say that Shenlinjun's reserve force was all generals. Not to mention their army, looking at the entire northern frontier, except for the 5,000-star Fallen Army, there was probably only the secret army formed by the Star class that could win against Shenlinjun's reserve force. After all, Shenlinjun was selecting generals, but the Star class selection of recruits was almost like selecting monsters. Zhang Xiuzhu, a scholarly general, could be regarded as a confidant and successor by Li Zhongxing after meeting Li Zhongxing face to face. Naturally, he had the ability. And he was only qualified to be invited to the Star class for an interview. If he rejected it, then so be it. It was as if Lin Yuan had never cared about him. Although Li Zhongxing had the title of Southern Expedition General, in fact, he had only been brought out of Shenlinjun's reserve force for a little more than a year. However, this did not mean that Li Zhongxing was a newcomer to the battlefield. On the contrary, with Luo Su's teaching and the process of fighting against various aristocratic families in the north, Li Zhongxing's growth speed could be said to be leaps and bounds. He quickly implemented the knowledge that he had learned in Wei River City. The current Li Zhongxing could not be said to be a famous general who could move unhindered in the world, but his level was not inferior to veteran generals who had fought hundreds of battles on the battlefield. Just based on this point, one could tell what kind of monsters were in the Star class, not to mention those talented generals that Lin Yuan had focused on recruiting. Any one of them, after training for a period of time and turning their theoretical knowledge into experience, could be an existence that could lead a large army by themselves. We can't beat them, but that doesn't mean that I can't deal with them. My soldiers! Zhang Xiuzhu leaned against the fortifications and roared in a low voice. The elite soldiers around instantly cast their gazes over. Zhang Xiuzhu smiled and nodded, saying, "What you faced just now was not the aristocratic family's rebel army, not the roaming bandits of the forest, but the divine martial heavy steps, Shenlinjun." Speaking up to this point, Zhang Xiuzhu paused and said with a bit of ridicule, "Of course, it's the reserve force. As the saying goes, a person's name is like a tree's shadow." Shenlinjun's name was well known throughout the world. Even the people of the northern frontier had heard of this invincible army that gathered the leaders of the Shenwu dynasty. If they were told that the ambush was Shenlinjun, even if these elite soldiers had a strong sense of bravery in their hearts, they would not do something that would send them to their deaths. However, Zhang Xiuzhu pointed out that the other party was a reserve force, and even used a ridiculing tone to speak, which immediately drove away the nervousness in the hearts of many people. After the surrounding atmosphere calmed down a little, Zhang Xiuzhu continued, "Of course, Shenlinjun has been an army for decades, and the requirements for recruiting soldiers are basically the king of soldiers or the talented orphans of the battlefield. However, my southern expedition has been an official army for less than half a year. Asking you to go and risk your lives is a bit too much." The corner of Yu Dingchen's mouth twitched crazily. Listening to the continuous roaring laughter, he felt that his whole body was not good. Is there anyone who can boost morale like this? Just come up and tell your own soldiers that you can't beat them at all. Then why are you still here? Isn't it better to escape early? But it's not that we don't have a chance of winning. Zhang Xiuju's tone suddenly changed, and with a touch of the aura of a powerful army he said in a deep voice, "We can't beat them, but you did a good job before." At this moment, Shen Linjun probably thinks that our group is one of the best in the northern frontier, and that we might be on par with them. Therefore, after they took advantage of us with the rain of arrows, they don't dare to come out and fight with us. Team leader, what do you mean by win? A burly man slowly stood up and asked doubtfully, "We can't beat them in a fight. Why don't we take advantage of the fact that they are suspicious of us to retreat and stay here to wait for them to react?" Obviously, this man was a typical person who was frightened by Shen Linjun's name. As soon as he heard that they were no match for Shen Linjun, he immediately wanted to retreat. If it weren't for the fact that military orders were absolute, this man would have already started to run away. Therefore, when Zhang Xiuju tried to boost morale, he took the initiative to stand up and try to persuade Zhang Xiuju to withdraw the troops. Use your stupid brain and think about it. Shen Linjun is hiding in the dense forest. They can see us, but we can't see them. Why didn't they take advantage of the long-range attack after they took advantage of us? Instead, why did they stay silent? Yu Dingchen angrily pointed at the burly man and sneered, "With this little ability, you still have the face to say that you are a graduate of the Northern Frontier Academy? I advise you to go back to the furnace as soon as possible. Don't disgrace the Northern Frontier soldiers." Chapter 5:19. Zhang Xiuju slowly raised his right hand and pressed down Yu Dingchen's hand. He smiled and said, "Brother, that's a good question. If I want to win this war, I have to tell you what our chance of victory is. I also have to tell you why I'm so sure that we can win when I'm sure you're no match for them in a hand-to-hand combat." This time, even the burly man and Yu Dingchen looked at him with curiosity written all over their faces. First of all, although they are indeed elites who are stronger than us, they are still defeated soldiers in essence. If you've been praised as number one in the world for so many years and then suddenly got pulled down from your pedestal, your first reaction would be to fight with your life on the line. But if you can't beat them, you would feel sorry for yourself and feel that you don't deserve the title of number one in the world. If you meet someone who's not weak, you might not be able to win. Right now, the Divine Forest Army's reserve forces were in such a state of mind. Simply put, their confidence had already been shattered. Otherwise, they wouldn't even have this round of arrow rain. In the past, how could the Divine Forest Army's reserve forces put us, who had seen our banners, in their eyes? Second of all, although they seemed to have the upper hand, we didn't lose much of our main force. On the contrary, not long after they were defeated in Wei River City, their connection with the Central Plains was cut off by us. No matter how elite they are, as long as they can't cross the Wei River, they are like rootless duckweeds. Their arrows and rations are getting less and less because there are no lone troops on this plain. They are either hordes of demon beasts or demi-human troops, a large number of auxiliary troops from my southern expedition, or the Fallen Star Army that broke their mentality. Therefore, they can't get any supplies at all. Of course, you may ask me why they don't bully the Shuangjin Barbarian. In fact, the answer is very simple. Because the Shuangjin Barbarian are now poorer and more miserable than them. At least there are some supplies stored in the Wei River City tunnels for them to maintain. But what can the Shuangjin Barbarian eat after their rations and horses? They were so hungry that they wanted to eat people. Thirdly, based on the above situation, Shen Linjun's reserve force is currently using the tactic of breaking up the entire force and trying to infiltrate all parts of the northern frontier territory. They are waiting for the Shenwu dynasty to use them in the future. However, the northern frontier territory is currently being cleaned up and all the resources have been moved to the hinterland of the northern frontier. The northern frontier prince's mansion is in charge of the distribution of the resources, and the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce is personally escorting them. Therefore, it is a complete joke for them to try to infiltrate the place. Not to mention all kinds of supplies, they might not even be able to find people. That's why the bullsh asterisk T of breaking up into smaller groups and sneaking into other places is just to fool people. They split up into various small groups simply because their main group can't support so many people. They can only be separated and left to fend for themselves. That's why we've only encountered some abandoned remnants. That's why they don't dare to show themselves even now. Zhang Xiuzhu stretched out his hand and pointed at the dense forest in front of them. He grinned and said, "What you're facing now isn't the world's number one. It's just a group of defeated and abandoned dregs. Can anyone tell me how we're going to lose against such dregs?" Put. Zhang Xiuzhu stretched out his hand and slapped his face as he spoke. He said coldly, "We can't lose this battle, and we can't lose. Anyway, I, Zhang Xiuzhu, can't afford to lose face like this. I think everyone here can't afford to lose face like this either. Fight to the death. Fight to the death." Zhang Xiuzhu's method of mobilizing the troops' morale wasn't brilliant, but it was very clever. Firstly, he directly stated that with their strength, they would definitely be annihilated if they engaged in hand-to-hand combat. This made certain people who were eager to gain merit and disregarded the consequences would have no choice but to obediently stay behind the fortifications and listen to Zhang Xiuzhu's arrangements. Secondly, Zhang Xiuzhu fully analyzed the situation of the troops opposite them. In an atmosphere of near despair, he forcibly described the reserves of the world's number one army as smelly trash. This allowed them to see the dawn of victory in their despair. Thirdly, Zhang Xiuzhu bluntly called the other party dregs. If he lost this battle, wouldn't it mean that their team was even worse than dregs? No one was willing to lose face. Even Zhang Xiuzhu, who had lost both his parents and begged from door to door every day when he was young. Zhang Xiuzhu, who relied on hundreds of families to survive, couldn't afford to lose face like this. Not only would these people who had relatives and friends die in society, but even their relatives and friends would also be unable to raise their heads. Put. Hearing the shouts around him, Zhang Xiuzhu gently clapped his hands to signal for everyone to be quiet. He smiled and said, "All right, although these dregs have become the first step to our fame, if we want to win this battle, we still have to follow my arrangements. Now let's bury the pot and cook." Huh. The corner of Yu Dingxin's mouth twitched violently again. What the F***ck is he playing at? First, he stirred up the morale of the troops with a set of twists and turns. This bastard actually didn't take advantage of this time to do anything meaningful. Instead, he wanted the troops to bury the pot and cook, as if everyone had been hungry all this time. I know, you guys don't know why I want you to bury the pot and cook. Actually, I don't want to explain it. Zhang Xiuzhu watched the troops begin to prepare, then he smiled and said, "But just in case, I advise you guys to use this time to adjust the crossbows and familiarize yourself with the swords. Otherwise, when those guys rush out later, you guys won't even be able to withstand the first round. Those Shenlin Jun reserve soldiers inside don't know when the last time they had a proper meal is. If we cook here, once the aroma spreads out, it would be strange if they obediently watch." Awesome team! After a short moment of silence, a young soldier suddenly yelled out. Even if they were on the plains, they might not be able to beat him, let alone in the dense forest with complicated terrain. These Shenlin Jun reserve soldiers had been on guard for the past 2 days. Zhang Xiuzhu really didn't have the confidence to take down this tough bone. After all, they were a group of elite soldiers. If they only relied on the geographical advantage of the dense forest to defend themselves, even if Li Zhongxing and his personal guards came over, there was no way they could win this battle. However, these Shenlin Jun reserve soldiers didn't attack them because they hated the people from the northern frontier. From the very beginning, their goal was to escort this batch of supplies. After all, the transport team of the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce wasn't something that a group of defeated soldiers could challenge in terms of size and strength. Therefore, the Frost Mirror Cavalry wasn't the only ones who couldn't get supplies. Chapter 520. The supply troops brought back 2 bags of food that were scattered outside the attack range of the forest. They quickly started cooking. However, the rest of the troops didn't chat like they usually did when they were waiting for their meals. Instead, they silently used whetstones to test the sharpness of their weapons. A group of soldiers with strange crossbows were squatting behind the simple fortifications. They were all listening to the movements on the other side of the fortifications. To them, the enemy that attacked first was nothing but prey. "Brother Yu, what did your team leader say?" Kei Ting, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground, turned his head and asked Yu Dingchen. His face was pale from fear. He didn't know who the ambushers in the forest were, but they definitely weren't the Frost Mirror cavalry. The arrows they used weren't the arrows of the Frost Mirror grassland. Even if the Frost Mirror cavalry were starving, they wouldn't attack their own people. "Our commander said that there's a group of troublesome enemies hiding in the forest ahead. If we rush in and engage them in hand-to-hand combat, we'll lose without a doubt." Yu Dingchen chewed on the jerky in his hand as he spoke slowly. "But their target is our supplies. If we start cooking here, they'll take the risk and rush out of the forest to attack us. At that time, we can rely on the fortifications to kill them one by one." The reason Yu Dingchen was eating jerky wasn't because he had the privilege of an officer. It was because 500 of them, including him, were chosen to be Shen Linjun's reserve troops. They were the last line of defense near the fortifications. Once that happened, they had to rush out and engage the enemy in hand-to-hand combat to buy time and space for the archers behind them to kill the enemy. Then, did your team leaders say who the other party was? Kei Tung looked at the jerky in Yu Dingchen's hand and swallowed his saliva as he asked in a low voice. Because Zhang Xiuzhu was a meticulous person, he always remembered what his persona was. Even when he was trying to boost morale, he was still using the code words of the Northern Frontier Army. Therefore, from what Kei Ting heard, the mute general was constantly telling his troops unknown numbers, and yet he was still able to stir up everyone's emotions. That was why Kei Ting asked this question out of curiosity. It wasn't that he hadn't thought that the enemy in the forest was the army of the northern region, but Zhang Xiuzhu and his men had reacted too quickly. The sentries who had gone into the forest to scout the situation hadn't even come out in a dozen breaths. They had immediately overturned the supply wagons and withstood the first salvo. Kei Ting did not believe that this was Zhang Xiuzhu's prediction. After all, if such an outstanding general was placed in the Shuangjian dynasty, he would at least be a major commander who commanded tens of thousands of cavalry. He would not be a direct subordinate of only 5 people. All of this seemed like a script that the northern frontier had prepared in advance. But after giving it some thought, Kei Ting felt that this wasn't the case. If the Northern Territory wanted to send people to disguise themselves as other troops to ambush and kill, they would first have to let these people see the other party's armor or identification. Then, while they were charging in, they would also make sure to leave behind some of the more important people among them as witnesses to report back to the Empire. This would infuriate the Reflection Frost dynasty. However, the enemy had no intention of showing up until now. Moreover, the previous attacks had no intention of leaving anyone alive. The only reason they were able to survive the first round of attacks was because of their cultivation and riding skills. After dodging the scythe of the Grim Reaper, they were able to roll and crawl behind the temporary fortifications. Yu Dingchen sneered and narrowed his eyes. The Shuangjian dynasty might not have many spies, but that doesn't mean they don't know anything about the Frost Mirror Plains, right? Young clan leader, how many troops do you think there are in the north that can be considered troublesome to deal with? Aside from the Shuangjian dynasty's Blood Liao Knights, the only force that could influence the north was Shen Linjun. Thinking of this, Kei Ting's lips trembled. He whispered, "Are you guys crazy? How dare we challenge Shen Linjun with just the few of us? No wonder your team leader said that if we fought hand-to-hand, you would lose without a doubt." At this point, Kei Ting's expression changed slightly and he continued, "Also, if it really is the Divine Forest Army, your crossbow bolts may not be able to penetrate their armor. Fighting a positional battle is only delaying them a little. If this continues, we will all die." Yu Dingchen shook his head and smiled. "What Shen Linjun? They are just a bunch of defeated soldiers who have abandoned their armor. Not to mention that their armor might not be useful, even if it could block our arrows, they wouldn't have the guts to wear it. After all, the Divine Forest Army's reserve force had already been crushed by Gao Jia. The group of soldiers who had escaped were already in a state of panic. When the army couldn't afford to feed so many people, not only would they be chased out of the group, even the armor or training uniform that could prove their identity would be taken away. If the defeated soldiers were to flee in the north, they would encounter the Northern Frontier Army sooner or later. If a few powerful characters appeared, it would be easy for them to calculate the movement path of the defeated soldiers based on where they appeared. Then, they would be able to annihilate them. As a precaution, when the defeated soldiers were kicked out of the group, everything that could prove their identity would be taken away. When a tiger lost its claws and teeth, and an elephant lost its skin, these so-called fierce beasts, what was there to be afraid of? At this point, Yu Dingchen raised the jerky in his hand and said with a smile, "There's also this food. After eating it, you'll have to rush out and engage in close combat with the enemy when they're close enough to buy time for the archers behind. I see that you have been staring at it. Do you want to eat?" Keiju's expression changed slightly. While he grew up in a harsh environment like the Frost Mirror Grassland and was at the pinnacle of the airborne realm, as the young chief of the Greenfish tribe, how much danger could he have encountered? Many years of living like a prince had long since wiped away the courage in Keiju's body, and what little courage he had left was not enough to support his courage to charge out and engage in close combat with the enemy after knowing the identity of the enemy. Therefore, after a moment of hesitation, Keiju shook his head very calmly. It was obvious that he had overcome his appetite. They were all elite soldiers, so they carried out orders very quickly. It didn't take long for the aroma of the stewed rice to spread. Not only did it spread to the jungle, but even the simple fortifications had many people drooling. However, everyone knew that the cooking was just to lure the enemy out. At the very least, they had to wait until the upcoming battle was over before they could enjoy the meal. Chapter 521. About 500 miles away from the fortifications. Xiao En, who had tied his long blonde hair behind his head, leaned against a tree trunk next to him and raised his hand to signal for them to stop. Nearly 5,000 tree elves quickly stopped and squatted on the tree trunks, clenching the black composite bows in their hands. Further away, nearly 10,000 soldiers riding various Yao beasts also put on their helmets and faceplates again, clenching their spears and halberds, waiting for Commander Xiao En's next order. They were the demi-human troops under Xiao En's direct command. Although they were not counted as part of the army of the northern frontier, their contribution in this war was not small. Once the war was over, they could quickly get rid of their temporary status and become the first regular army composed of demi-humans in the nominally human-led forces. They would no longer be the slave soldiers and cannon fodder they used to be. For the entire demi-human race, this change was obviously rare and commendable. It was worth it for them to risk their lives for it. Lin Yuan's voice slowly sounded in their minds. 500 miles ahead, a southern expedition is preparing for battle. Quickly move to the battlefield and prepare for support. But remember, this battle does not belong to your troops. Unless your allies are about to be wiped out, you and your subordinates are not allowed to intervene. Xiao En cupped his hands toward the void in front of him, a touch of excitement appearing on his cold face. Their original mission was to wander between the Frost Mirror Cavalry's encampment and Eastwood City. They were supposed to kill the reservists of the Divine Forest Army and the exiles of the Frost Mirror Cavalry to ensure that these people would not affect Eastwood City's Great Wall Plan. But this time, Lin Yuan personally gave the order, which meant that they could end this boring and tedious work. They could soon enter the battlefield and prove to the human soldiers that their demi-human army was also powerful. Everyone, stay hidden and follow me. Remember, don't attack without my order. Xiao En waved his hand and gave a few instructions to the subordinates around him. Soon, a herald flew out with a flag signal. This war machine composed of more than 10,000 demi-humans was once again in operation. In Shunning City, Ding Zai stood beside Lin Yuan with a smile and said in a deep voice, "Lord Dragon King is indeed an ambitious and ruthless man, playing the Shuangjian dynasty and Shenwu dynasty in the palm of your hand. Every move of yours is like a calm chess player, precise, deadly, and elegant. Stop your flattery. Li Zhong, who was sitting on the throne, interrupted Ding Zai's flattery and sneered, I heard that Shanglu Association is very dissatisfied with a subordinate like you who played a good hand so badly. Originally, they wanted to execute you, but seeing that you still worked hard, they sent you on another mission to atone for your crimes. I think your mission isn't to come to the northern frontier to flatter our Dragon King, right? Lin Yuan also coldly glanced at Ding Zai. Although he didn't say anything, the meaning was very clear, carrying a bit of warning. Ding Zai's face slightly stiffened. He looked at Li Zhong with some fear, a cold light flashing in his eyes. Shanglu Association was a top faction after all. Their every move was hidden in the inner layer of the world. Even if they were doing something, countless people would use superficial skills to cover it up. If it wasn't for internal members leaking information, outsiders would definitely not know about Shanglu Association's actions. Now that Li Zhong had seen through his disguise so easily, it was obvious that he had received some information in advance. Either the Shifter Emperor Association spies had already infiltrated Shanglu Association, and their status shouldn't be low. Otherwise, they wouldn't know about the higher-ups' opinions on how to deal with him. Or, there were people in Shanglu Association who wished for Ding Zai's death. Before he arrived at the northern frontier, they had already leaked information to the northern frontier, letting Lin Yuan and Li Zhong know that he came with a mission that he had to complete. Because of this, they would have a bad impression of him. At the very least, all the channels of persuasion and flattery to repair the relationship between the two sides were blocked. Is Shanglu Association dissatisfied with this king's division of benefits, or? Lin Yuan finally opened his mouth, and there was some indifference in his tone. He wasn't afraid that Shanglu Association would fall out with him. After all, he wasn't strong enough. In this incident, he was only playing the role of cutting the cake. He didn't even eat much of the cake. All he could do was lick the cream on his knife. If Shanglu Association wasn't satisfied with this division of benefits, then they wouldn't be challenging Lin Yuan. Instead, they would be challenging the huge interest group formed by the other top factions. In the face of such a level of power, even if Shanglu Association was a top faction, it was just a building that could be crushed at any time. Ding Zai shook his head lightly and sneered. Dragon King, you are overthinking. Although I am indeed here with a mission, this matter won't affect you or me. In fact, it is an enemy that you have to face. By informing you in advance, I am doing your northern frontier a huge favor. It will prevent you from being overwhelmed. Speaking up to this point, Ding Zai cast a sidelong glance at Li Zhong. The sneer on his face deepened. I originally wanted to repair the relationship between the two sides. After all, I am a vice president of the Association of the Demon the Arch. If I could obtain the support of the Association of the Demon the Arch, then I would have more authority in Shanglu Association. In some decisions, I would naturally be more biased towards the northern frontier. Unfortunately, it seems like I was overthinking. Lin Yuan and Li Zhong both looked at Ding Zai with indifferent expressions. They didn't seem to be moved at all. Among the three people present, which one of them wasn't a demon? If Ding Zai could obtain the support of the Association of the Demon the Arch, he would indeed be biased towards them in Shanglu Association's decisions regarding the northern frontier. However, that was only because with a powerful association of the Demon the Arch, Ding Zai's power would be greater. Both sides were in a relationship of mutual benefit and prosperity. It wasn't like Ding Zai's tone sounded like he was only looking out for the northern frontier. Ahem, then I will be direct. This time, I came to the northern frontier to inform you of the news. It is Lei Qiusheng's trump card. Because you, Lin Yuan, had previously led the evil sect members to the south, Lei Qiusheng had found a very suitable target to push the blame to. As such, we can no longer intervene. This matter can also be said to be you lifting a rock and smashing it on your own feet. Therefore, before the northern frontier is destroyed and things become completely out of control, we will not directly intervene. Ding Zai cleared his throat. Clearly, he didn't expect that Lin Yuan and Li Zhong didn't have any intention of giving him a way out. With resentment in his heart, Ding Zai didn't even use honorifics. Looking at Lin Yuan and Li Zhong, there was even a hint of pity in his eyes. "Don't talk nonsense." Li Zhong's face darkened as he growled in a low voice. Chapter 522. The reason why Lei Qiusheng dared to tear the Shenwu dynasty apart is actually very simple. It's because his trump card isn't an army or powerful cultivators. It's because he obtained support that he shouldn't have. With their existence, let alone the Shenwu dynasty, it's not impossible for him to sweep through the world if we don't interfere. The Dragon King is in existence from the ancient demon court. I think in the documents you obtained, there should be something called the Sky Demon recorded. It is the same as the Dragon race and the Kirin race today, an existence from the other side of the Celestial Gate. And unlike the former, these Sky Demons do not have any goodwill towards us. In their eyes, all living things are just food. Lei Qiusheng's trump card is that he has a relationship with a terrifying Sky Demon. When necessary, as long as Lei Qiusheng can give enough sacrifices, he can summon a group of powerful Sky Demons to fight for him. And during this period of war, countless souls have become sacrifices for Lei Qiusheng to please the Sky Demon. In other words, he does not need to make any preparations to pull in the Sky Demon army in the south. After these Sky Demons eat all the living things in the south, they will regain part of their rationality. In this way, Lei Qiusheng can command the Sky Demon army through that powerful existence. For example, he can let them bypass the Central Plains and attack the northern frontier, Frost Mirror, and Xinjiang. Ding Zai shook his head and smiled bitterly. In order to shut our mouths, Lei Qiusheng pushed this matter to the evil cult in the south and pointed the reason for the evil cult entering the south to you. Therefore, it is not good for us to interfere. In addition, you are the successor of the demon court, so you naturally have the obligation to deal with these dirty guys. So, Li Zhong digested the information and said with a dark face, "Because you are afraid of trouble, you decided to let us fight with Lei Qiusheng?" To put it bluntly, that is indeed the case. Ding Zai put his hands behind his back and said in a deep voice, "In our original plan, once Lei Qiusheng is forced into a corner, he will naturally summon the Sky Demon army. At that time, we can legitimately interfere and directly wipe out the Sky Demon and Lei Qiusheng. But now, according to the higher-ups, you caused the trouble, so you have to deal with it yourselves." At this point, Ding Zai paused. Seeing that the man and the Sky Demon had no intention of acting up, he continued, "Of course, we will support them from the outside. The chaos of the Sky Demon can only occur in the Shenwu dynasty. Once the northern frontier is destroyed, or the Sky Demon leave the Shenwu dynasty's territory, we will immediately eliminate them." Ding Zai's meaning was that the life and death of the northern frontier had nothing to do with them. When he finished speaking, Ding Zai had already planned to leave. After all, Lin Yuan and Li Zhong did not give him any face. Right now, he could not wait for the northern frontier to be destroyed, so that he could wash away the humiliation on his body. If you walk out like that, I can guarantee that even if I don't do anything to you, the Upper Deer Association will destroy your soul. Lin Yuan's voice suddenly sounded behind Ding Zai. Ding Zai's movements paused slightly, a layer of cold sweat suddenly appeared on his forehead. This was because the term soul dispersing did not belong to the Sky Martial Continent. It was the highest punishment that the top powers would use to deal with their enemies, traitors, and trash. Once someone was included in this list, even their soul would be completely destroyed. Although Lin Yuan could tell from his innate ability to summon the Nether Realm's black water that there was no underworld in this world, there was still a law that guided the souls and the dead in this world to reincarnate. And from the fact that there were no demons and monsters in this world, this law was much more effective than the so-called underworld. Once the soul was destroyed, it was equivalent to being completely erased from this world. It would be impossible to reincarnate or become a Yin spirit. It was a punishment that was even more severe than death. The Upper Deer Association also benefits from this, so it's not good for us to directly interfere. It doesn't mean that we won't interfere. If you refuse to carry out the mission given by the higher-ups, you will die a horrible death, and even your soul will not be able to escape. Lin Yuan's voice sounded again, like the whispers of a demon from the underworld lying on a human's shoulder. Ding Zai turned around and was about to speak when Lin Yuan interrupted him again. I have the means to deal with the Sky Demon, so I don't need you to provide me with the weapons needed to kill the Sky Demon. But after destroying the Sky Demon's body, my army must have the demon-suppressing weapon to ensure that all the dead Sky Demons will be captured and brought to me. According to the inheritance of the underwater's secret realm, the Sky Demon was actually a spiritual body similar to a ghost. They could invade other worlds at will, but they did not have a physical body. They could only use the method of seducing life forms to possess them. Then, they would fulfill the desires of the possessed person and devour the other person's soul. After achieving their goal of taking over the other person's nest, they would become a real threat to the creatures of this world. Of course, the Sky Demon needed time to nourish his body and recover his strength. He could not possess just anyone he saw. Only those with strong resentment, hatred, and other negative emotions would become the target of his seduction. Neutral and peaceful creatures would not be able to sense the existence of the Sky Demon at all. This was an extremely troublesome thing, but it was also extremely easy to deal with. For example, the current citizens of the northern frontier were much happier than before. Naturally, they were in good shape and would not give the Sky Demon any chance to take advantage of them. Thus, in theory, as long as all the creatures in the territory were happy, the Sky Demon would never breed. However, for the Shenwu dynasty, the continuous battles and hopeless predicament caused the citizens of the Shenwu dynasty to develop a large number of negative emotions. This could be said to be a breeding ground for the Sky Demon. The most troublesome thing about the Sky Demon was that they were spiritual bodies. Even if their physical bodies were destroyed, they would not die. At most, their minds would be injured and they would transform into formless objects to escape. After a period of time, they would possess a new physical body and become a new Sky Demon warrior. However, it was obvious that not everyone had a way to see and attack spiritual bodies. If they did not have the demon-suppressing weapon developed by the Heavenly Gate Guardian, these Sky Demon warriors would not be destroyed even if they died 100 times. They would be able to wear down the citizens of the northern frontier. What was even more frightening was that once they fell into a quagmire of war that they could not see any hope of winning, the citizens of the northern frontier would develop all sorts of negative emotions. In the timeline of the Tianwu continent, who knew how many powerful forces had been destroyed because of the Sky Demon that could not be killed? However, Lin Yuan's nether realm Blackwater could be said to be the nemesis of the Sky Demon. The more Sky Demon he pulled in, the more powerful Lin Yuan's natural endowments would be. However, it was obvious that he could not appear anywhere in the northern frontier at any time. It was even more impossible for him to deal with the Sky Demon army that was attacking from all sides. Chapter 523. This condition is acceptable, but the Deer Association's ability is limited. We can't equip all your troops with a demon-suppressing artifact. Even if we join forces with the other top factions, we can only equip every 5,000 troops with a demon-suppressing artifact. Ding Zai spread out his hands and frowned. Lei Qiusheng summoning the Sky Demon army is just a small matter to the entire Sky Martial continent. The enemy we have to face is even more ferocious, and even if we have extra demon-suppressing artifacts, we can use them to replace the damaged ones at any time. Lin Yuan nodded slightly. An enemy that could pin down all the top experts of the Sky Martial continent was indeed terrifying. Even the current Lin Yuan felt a headache when facing the Sky Demon army, but these top forces had to face opponents that were even more ferocious and powerful than the Sky Demon. At the same time, they had to deploy a portion of their people to monitor the entire Sky Martial continent at all times to prevent the enemy from stabbing them in the back. Including the demon-suppressing artifacts in the inherited memories, as well as the information about the world on the other side of the Heaven Gate, they were not created out of thin air. Countless creatures had paid the price of blood to accumulate this information bit by bit. It was also because of this unyielding spirit and sacrifice that the Sky Martial continent was able to maintain its current prosperous and peaceful appearance. The history of the creatures on the other side of the Heaven Gate tens of thousands of years ago had already been sealed in the long river of history by all the top forces. Unless one reached a certain realm or had an ancient inheritance, they would not be able to obtain any information. However, Ding Zai's gaze paused on Lin Yuan for a moment, and his tone became respectful again. You said that you have a way to deal with the Sky Demon. Do you mean to seal them, or... The Sky Demon was a large race of creatures on the other side of the Heaven Gate. Their fighting strength was not considered strong, and because they had an almost unlimited lifespan, the Sky Demon's cultivation speed was also abnormally slow. Other than under certain circumstances, if a Sky Demon wanted to directly affect the material world, they still needed a physical body. The stronger the Sky Demon, the higher the aptitude of the physical body, and the longer the time needed to recover their strength. However, the Sky Demon had no qualms about invading the Sky Martial continent because the cultivators of the Sky Martial continent did not have the ability to kill them. Even if they managed to find a devil-suppressing artifact that could seal the Sky Demon's spiritual body, the cultivators of the Martial Heaven continent could only bury the devil-suppressing artifact in some forbidden areas and then set up all kinds of traps and formations to ensure that no living beings would approach. Releasing the Sky Demon was just a way to imprison him. These sealed Sky Demons were still a huge threat because the Sky Demons could sense each other. Once a Sky Demon broke through the defenses set up by the cultivators, it would be very easy for the sealed Sky Demon to be released. Such cases were not rare. You can say that I killed him. Lin Yuan's different-colored eyes curved slightly, like a pair of crescent moons. He said calmly, they will exist in another form, but they will not casually threaten the living beings of the Sky Martial continent. Furthermore, the other Sky Demon will not be able to find them. Even if they find them, they will be treated as enemies. Was there a better method to deal with the Sky Demon than the sticks? As long as they dared to face Lin Yuan head-on, however many Sky Demons there were, they would be able to devour as many Sky Demons as there were. Lin Yuan's Nether Realm's Blackwater would become longer and wider because of this. The Sky Demon that was pulled into the Nether Realm's Blackwater would not die, but they would become Lin Yuan's most loyal warriors. Even if they encountered their own kind, they would be pulled into the Nether Realm's Blackwater to accompany them. Then let's wait and see. Ding Zai bowed slightly to Lin Yuan and said in a deep voice, we have sealed many Sky Demon all these years, but we have never been able to completely kill them. In recent years, due to the deaths of some powerful beings and the extinction of their forces, some ancient forbidden areas have already lost control. We suspect that the powerful Sky Demon that Lei Qiusheng contacted is most likely an ancient Sky Demon that broke out of the seal. Be careful. As soon as he finished speaking, Ding Zai left King Shuning's residence and quickly headed south. Li Zhong walked behind Lin Yuan and asked with a frown, Dragon King, do you think this person's words can be trusted? Li Zhong was born in a poor family, and there were no outstanding cultivators among his ancestors. In addition, all the top forces had joined hands to create an information blockade. If he was not loyal to Lin Yuan, he would never have come into contact with these things. If he came into contact with them, it would mean that the Sky Martial continent was finished. Therefore, Li Zhong would not express his own opinion on this matter, because an outsider was an outsider. Every word he said could affect Lin Yuan to make the wrong decision. Therefore, he could only remind Lin Yuan that Ding Zai was not trustworthy. Even if both sides were using each other, they had to be on guard in advance to avoid falling into the trap of others. 70% true, 30% false. Lin Yuan's smiling eyes returned to normal. He asked, is there any news from the south? Li Zhong nodded slightly. After hesitating for a while, he frowned and said, Qin Yu sent a message saying that a new force has appeared in the south. It seems to be called Jade Lake Immortal Palace. After investigation, it is confirmed that this Jade Lake Immortal Palace has released a kind of immortal elixir called Jade Lake Immortal Elixir. It is said that after persuading, one can leave their physical body and become an immortal. Then the Jade Lake Immortal Palace will provide a new young physical body for the immortal, helping them break free from the shackles of their lifespan. Do you believe it? Lin Yuan's voice contained a bit of a smile, but his expression did not change in the slightest. Li Zhong did not hesitate this time. He shook his head decisively and said in a cold voice, "There is no such thing as a free benefit in this world. I heard that the Jade Lake Immortal Palace does not take any benefits and gives the so-called immortal elixir to the cultivators who come to their door for free. Anyone with a bit of brain knows that this is a huge trap. Being able to let cultivators break free from their physical body that was about to decay due to the end of their lifespan and change into a new physical body to move about in the world was something that all cultivators dreamed of. After all, even the Imperial Sky Realm to the Heaven Star Realm could be said to be one step at a time. There were many cultivators who were stuck at a bottleneck and died. Even Beast Lord Kirin, who was said to be at the peak of the mortal world, was like this, not to mention other people with mediocre talent. If one could obtain an immortal lifespan, then there would be more possibilities. Perhaps one could really break into the next realm. But there was such a good thing that could be enjoyed without paying any price? Only those who were about to die and were unwilling to die and those brainless idiots would believe it. Chapter 524. It seems like our Black Jiao Beast King isn't interested in the elixir of immortality. Before Lin Yuan could say anything, a deep voice rang out. In the next moment, a Kirin the size of a small pony with a dark green body appeared in front of Li Zhong. Although it hadn't fully manifested itself, the powerful aura it exuded shocked Li Zhong so much that he couldn't speak. With such an appearance and such strength, there was only one existence in the entire Hengduan mountain range that fit the criteria. The Beast King Kirin, Ink Abyss. Lin Yuan was silent for a moment before he neutralized Kirin's aura. He chuckled and said, "Senior, you have inherited the memories from your bloodline. Naturally, you know better than me what the elixir of immortality is. Why are you teasing a junior like me?" Yao beasts were a race that paid attention to bloodlines. This was because their bloodline didn't only contain power, but also the memories engraved by their ancestors. Once their strength reached a certain level, these memories would awaken. Therefore, true descendants of divine beasts didn't need to worry about cultivation techniques at all. Once they reached a certain level, they would naturally obtain the techniques that belonged to their ancestors. Everyone thought that the Beast King Kirin was stuck at the peak of the desolate demon realm because he couldn't find the door. Only a few people knew that if he wanted to, he could break through to the next level at any time. It was just that he didn't do so. According to Lin Yuan's train of thought, the Beast King Kirin's style was more like the main characters in the novels in his previous life. They didn't want to copy the path of their ancestors because it was a path that belonged to others. Even if they walked step by step, they would only reach the peak of their ancestors. It would be a fool's dream to go further. As for the Beastmaster Qilin, it was not satisfied with being at the peak of the desolate demon realm. It was ambitious and wanted to carve out a path that belonged to itself. That was why it had been stuck at the peak of the desolate demon realm for so long. It was because of its talent and ambition. If it really couldn't do anything, it could still choose to accept the gifts from its ancestors and steadily break through to extend its lifespan. The reason Kirin was choosing the next Beastmaster was not because he was dying, but because he had already reached the threshold during his seclusion. Therefore, he could not wait to come out of seclusion and choose the next Beastmaster who could continue the inheritance of the Hengduan mountain range. He would then embark on his own path that he did not know the end of. Incubus nodded slightly and chuckled. "I don't believe that you are the successor of the demon court, but your soul does not belong to this world. You have the aura of the origin world, but it is not pure. I also know that everything you have today cannot be separated from some special existence." Incubus's words were very natural, but Lin Yuan vaguely felt that it had some kind of incredible magical power. That was because Li Zhong's face did not show any surprise when such terrifying news came from its mouth. Suddenly, Lin Yuan had an absurd thought. It seemed that the omnipotent system did not even hear its words. Only you and I can hear what I am going to say next. In order to not be noticed by some special existence, you only need to listen. Don't show anything strange on your face. First of all, I have to congratulate you for successfully deceiving the rules of this world. Other than an extremely special existence like me, or a powerful person who has already deduced your roots, no one will be able to see your origin. That is because the intricate karma on your body has already covered your soul, which is incompatible with this world. But you don't have to be happy because your origin is a hidden danger that must be eliminated for some existence, especially the things on the other side of the divine gate that they mentioned. They will covet you even more because they want to find the origin world even in their dreams. Because you come from the origin world, I will not say any more nonsense. Whether it is me, the inheritance of this world, or the things on the other side of the divine gate, they all come from a place that you know, the chaos. Incubus still maintained a calm attitude when it said these words. But Lin Yuan, who heard these words, had to try his best to suppress the excitement in his heart so that he would not show anything strange. The chaos. That was the origin of everything. Any creature from there was an immortal myth. If everything was related to the chaos, then the way back to the past world could indeed be found through the divine gate. The timeline of my ancestors was the first cultivation tribulation of the chaos. The so-called war between the three races was the battle between the dragons, phoenixes, and Kirin. However, the final winner of that war was not the demonic beasts of the three races, nor was it the Luo Ho who appeared out of nowhere. It was the old man Hong Jun. After that war, Hong Jun took control of the way of heaven. Nominally, he rewarded and punished all the existences who participated in that cultivation tribulation, but his purpose was just to steal the way of heaven. After Hong Jun obtained the great merits and was canonized as a sage, the chaos became his sole authority. The so-called 6 sages had to respectfully address Hong Jun as their teacher. Those who did not obey him would never have the chance to become a sage. After that, it was the second cultivation tribulation, which was the war between the shamans and the demons. It started with ancestor sorcerer Gonggong knocking down Mount Buzhou. Then, the 7 sages, including Hong Jun, used various means to mend the heavens. After that, the war between the shamans and the demons broke out. But the real purpose was just to deceive the public. We once again shattered the chaos world, mixed our bloodline with the fragments of the world, escaped into the void, and escaped from Hong Juan's enslavement. In order to live freely, too many of our ancestors have sacrificed themselves. In the past few years, we have also been hunted down countless times by Hong Jun's lackeys. I don't know how our compatriots who have escaped to other places are doing, but the Sky Martial continent where our race is located can be considered to be in imminent danger. However, the heavenly divination, one of them escaped. Even Hong Jun, who stole the heavenly Tao, could not control everything. I don't know when it started, but an unknown force shrouded this world, making it difficult for Hong Jun to infiltrate the Tianwu continent. And after these years of reproduction, that unknown force started to act strangely. I couldn't find a result no matter how much I tried. It was until you appeared that I was sure that the force was related to you. Although I don't have any evidence, I can be sure that the force that isolated Hong Jun came from the source world. And you are the destined person to face the tribulation. Sooner or later, you will return to the chaos world and push Hong Jun down from his throne. Incubus's voice still did not reveal any joy or sadness. Lin Yuan looked at Incubus quietly. He wanted to say something several times but stopped himself. There was no other reason. Incubus's words had a huge impact on him. It was as if all the myths he knew had been overturned. But Incubus's words did not seem to be baseless. Because after Hong Jun became a sage, the so-called 6 sages had to respectfully address him as teacher. Chapter 525. The races that once dominated the untainted land did not rise again after the Great War of the 3 races. After the Great War of the witches and demons shattered the untainted land, the old forces were almost completely wiped out. Only then did the weak human race become the hegemon, giving rise to a series of subsequent myths and legends. The human race was originally a race created by Nuwa. Strictly speaking, they were inextricably linked to Hongjun. Autumn beans fell. Lin Yuan adjusted his breathing and began to sort out the huge amount of information in Incubus's words. So my system is actually the so-called power of the source world, which is one of the powers that Hongjun has yet to control. If I follow this train of thought, then the third cataclysm of the untainted land, which is the battle between the sages, is also a conspiracy? Is the heaven that the founder of Tong Tian who teaches everyone without discrimination actually the original heavenly Tao? Because the founder of Tong Tian was unwilling to be controlled by Hongjun, the third cataclysm shattered the untainted land, causing the so-called source world to escape with the fragments. And the founder of Tongtian's subordinates were mostly demons, who were basically the remnants of the old forces. Because in the second cataclysm, the witches and demons broke away from Hongjuan's control by shattering the untainted land. Even though they were constantly being hunted down by Hongjun, the heavenly Tao that was about to be completely controlled by Hongjun saw the hope of survival. If not for the fact that he had to maintain a calm appearance, Lin Yuan would have gasped at this moment. However, the so-called third cataclysm was definitely not something that Incubus and the other demons who had escaped during the second cataclysm knew about. No wonder the science and technology on Earth had developed rapidly. The so-called metaphysics, ghosts and gods had always been listed as feudal superstitions. Even the so-called untainted land was listed as an unverifiable myth. Even the history of Huaxia, which had been passed down for more than 5,000 years, stopped at the Zhou dynasty. Even if everyone knew about the existence of the untainted land, no one could find any evidence. This was the heavenly Tao of the source world. It was erasing Hongjuan's existence, ensuring that Hongjun would not be able to discover the source world. From Lin Yuan's memories of the original world, it seemed that the way of heaven had already done quite well in this aspect. Furthermore, it had even begun to fight against Hongjun and the primordial world. The old forces such as Ravenhill Manor and the Dragon Palace of the Four Seas had actually already established a connection with the source world. However, not many people knew about it, and Lin Yuan, an anomaly from the source world, was one of them. In that case, what exactly was his system? The will of the heavenly Tao of the source world? If he thought about it this way, it did not seem impossible. The system had disguised itself well, and it was indeed no different from the systems in novels. However, it obviously had its own will and judgment, and it seemed that there was nothing it could not do or not know. Other than the reasonable explanation that it was the way of heaven, even an advanced alien civilization was not enough to prove that it was magical. This was because it was not making Lin Yuan stronger or giving Lin Yuan wealth. Its every action could only be explained by miracles. It was molding itself into a powerful god, a god comparable to Hongjun, but it did not want itself to be out of control. Therefore, the system directly labeled the talent of the Nether Realm's Blackwater as dangerous and uncontrollable. If Lin Yuan became stronger through the power of the Nether Realm's Blackwater and became a god who controlled the underworld, then Lin Yuan would no longer be controlled. This was because Lin Yuan was not created by the system. It could not deprive Lin Yuan of his own power. Lin Yuan suddenly thought of the dove snake that had tried to devour the system's power. No wonder the system had changed its usual behavior and destroyed it directly. Based on this information, wasn't Hongjun also a dove snake? However, Hongjun had already succeeded. Out of the 50 great paths, Hongjun had already grasped 4 out of 9. If he controlled the last one, Hongjun would no longer be a saint and would no longer need to hold the title of the Way of Heaven spokesperson. Because at that time, Hongjun would be the Way of Heaven. But why was he the one who was chosen? With his own strength, how could he challenge the legendary mighty Hongjun? Even if he could defeat Hongjun, would the Way of Heaven allow a second Hongjun to appear? At that time, what would be the outcome waiting for him? Complex thoughts appeared in Lin Yuan's mind. It was only at this time that Lin Yuan dared to think like this. Incubus was now using a secret technique to block the system's perception. If it was under normal circumstances, These thoughts that might be the truth would be enough for the system to directly erase Lin Yuan's existence. It seems that you have thought of a lot. That's right, you are a smart guy. It doesn't matter whether you are intentional or not. In any case, you will get the same information. Incubus still had an emotionless expression as it slowly said, I am not telling you this for benefits. I simply do not wish for a situation like Hongjuan's to happen. You Hongjun and the Source World. The three of you are in a tripartite situation. Only then will there be room for us remnants of the old era to survive. Otherwise, our fates will be extremely miserable. Incubus's thoughts were very dark, but it was very similar to the experiences of its ancestors. Since the beginning of the primordial age, the best time for these old powers was before the war between the three races. Whether it was the heavenly Tao that instigated the war, or Hongjun who later plucked the peach, they all saw clearly that the only one in this world they could truly trust was themselves. Now, the Source World had pushed Lin Yuan to compete with Hongjun. If Lin Yuan could have his own strength, then the three parties would form a situation of checks and balances. Only in this situation would they have room to survive. Alright, it has been too long. I should leave. If this continues, it will notice. Incubus lowered its head slightly and said in a low voice, In short, I do not ask you to remember my feelings. However, in my opinion, Hongjun and the Source World have their own plans. You are just like us, a sacrifice. Only if you live can we live. From now on, your every move must be carefully considered. Don't easily fall into a trap. When its voice fell, Lin Yuan only felt his vision blur. When he regained consciousness, Incubus had already disappeared. Only the worried-looking Li Zhong was standing beside him. Lord Dragon King, is what it said true? Li Zhong suddenly asked, causing Lin Yuan to be slightly startled. Could it be that Incubus's secret technique had failed? Did that mean that the system and Li Zhong had heard everything? No, it couldn't be like that. If the system heard these words, there was a 90% chance that the system, which seemed to be the heavenly Tao, would erase his existence. What do you think? Lin Yuan looked at Li Zhong strangely and opened his mouth to swindle him. Chapter 526. The Jade Lake Immortal Palace's public offering of the elixir of immortality might not be able to attract the truly top-notch experts, but the vast majority of middle and low-level cultivators will try their luck. The Jade Lake Immortal Palace, in particular, will let those successful immortals appear and speak. This will undoubtedly greatly increase their credibility. In a short period of time, the Jade Lake Immortal Palace will gather a large number of middle and low-level cultivators to shake the entire situation. At this point, Li Zhong smiled bitterly and shook his head. He said bitterly, the cultivators who take the elixir of immortality will turn into sky demon. They can indeed obtain immortal life, but they will become a sky demon without self. What's the difference between this and direct death? Li Zhong's words made Lin Yuan let out a long breath of turbid air. Clearly, the previous conversation, which was neither long nor short, was not detected by the system. The effect of the secret technique was still present. What Li Zhong and the system heard was another conversation. What made Lin Yuan most excited was that before the incubus left, it left behind a final sentence. Although I don't know how you communicated with the origin before, it has no physical body and can only listen to the voices in other people's hearts. Therefore, I used a secret technique to conceal your thoughts. No matter who it is, no one will be able to wantonly detect your thoughts, unless you want it to hear them. This secret technique that the incubus had paid an unknown price to set up was Lin Yuan's second greatest gain in the past year of being a demon beast. It was comparable to the Nether Realm's black water talent that the dragonization route of unknown origin had brought to Lin Yuan. It doesn't matter. It's just middle and low-level cultivators. The true experts have already seen countless outstanding people fall in the long river of time. They won't believe that the elixir of immortality really exists in this world. Even if it's true, they won't try it. Lin Yuan softly spat out his snake tongue and said with a gloomy gaze, "The world's cultivators seek nothing more than strength and melting, but they can't avoid immortality. However, what they seek is their own immortality, not the immortality given by others. Li Zhong raised his head in confusion. Death is a very interesting thing. Human warriors like to engage in life and death battles with others, dancing between life and death. This way, they can become even more powerful existences. Fighting with humans, fighting with demonic beasts, they are all pursuing death. They are seeking for a breakthrough in that slim chance of survival. Therefore, what makes cultivators move forward is not cultivation, but death. If they want to pursue immortality, they won't resist the existence of death, because the latter is the best medicine to spur them forward. If immortality can be obtained easily, then what's the point of cultivation? Lin Yuan smiled indifferently and joked, "A bunch of trash who don't know how to cultivate. No matter how many of them there are, they are still trash." Cultivation was a very difficult thing. Without the help of external forces, every realm was a ladder to the heavens. Lin Yuan's own cultivation was like this, and the northern frontier's cultivators under his command were also like this. Lin Yuan had never understood why those who were loyal to him could increase their strength so quickly. For example, Li Zhongxing, as a member of Shin Lin Jun's reserve force. Although Li Zhongxing was an outstanding person, he was definitely not a monster. However, ever since he came to the northern frontier, Li Zhongxing had grown rapidly. Now, he had become one of the top generals in the northern frontier, far surpassing those Shin Lin Jun's reserve force who were in the same batch as him. The speed of cultivation could be explained. After all, Lin Yuan was now the largest spiritual item merchant in the Tianwu continent. His subordinates could naturally obtain more and better spiritual items. With the advantage of a huge amount of resources, the northern frontier's cultivators could grow much faster than others. Using spiritual items to increase one's cultivation was not a problem, but spiritual items would not directly increase one's combat strength and combat experience. However, after the northern frontier's cultivators' strength soared, they could quickly grasp the combat strength of their own realm. They were even more powerful than those unorthodox cultivators. There was also the sudden exposure of the northern frontier's aristocratic families and Kong Lezin's secret operation, and the sudden disappearance of the northern frontier's sections. These were all unsolved mysteries in Lin Yuan's heart. Until today, Lin Yuan finally got the answer. Because he had the help of heaven. He had the origin of heavenly Tao behind him. Naturally, everything went smoothly, and the speed of his subordinate strength was naturally rapid. After all, the strong enemy he had to face was not the Shenwu dynasty or those top forces, but a saint who had stolen the heavenly Tao. Lin Yuan's own strength could not increase slowly, and the existence of his subordinates naturally could not drag him down. Therefore, the entire northern frontier had the heavenly Tao behind him. Naturally, the speed of his growth was not something that ordinary people could compare to. "What do you mean?" Li Zhong seemed to have just reacted. He looked at Lin Yuan with a respectful expression. "Withdraw all the spies in the south. If they want to cause trouble, let them cause trouble." Lin Yuan stretched his body and sneered. "Originally, I had to make a trip to the West Sea Dragon Palace to clean up the mess for those evil cultists. However, Lei Qiusheng's move to divert the trouble has saved me a lot of trouble." Just wait, those evil cultists are not people who are willing to suffer losses. They have inexplicably taken the blame and will definitely fight to the death with Lei Qiusheng. Our luck is pretty good. It's all thanks to Lord Dragon King's plan. Li Zhong flattered Lin Yuan neither lightly nor heavily. In fact, in his opinion, everything that happened today was calculated by Lin Yuan in advance. It was just that Lei Qiusheng and Lin Yuan had schemed against each other, and in the end, neither of them had gained much advantage. However, to the northern frontier, not suffering losses was a victory, because the northern frontier was not the one who had to clean up the mess. In the end, Lin Yuan was still better. He could not figure out why Lin Yuan would attribute all of this to illusory luck. "If you want to change the plan, how should we deal with the Frost Mirror Cavalry?" Li Zhong saw that Lin Yuan had the intention to leave, so he quickened his pace to catch up with him and asked in a low voice. Lin Yuan glanced at Li Zhong and chuckled. Zhang Xiuzhu has already started, and those graduates of the Northern Frontier Military Academy will not watch their classmates rise without doing anything. Since they are willing to do this troublesome thing, then let the Frost Mirror Cavalry and Shin Lin Jun's reserve troops be the first bones for them to make a name for themselves. Zhang Xiuzhu's move to defeat Shin Lin Jun's reserve troops had actually gone against Lin Yuan's original intention, forcing him to change the plan. Since things had already come to this point, he would not force it. Before he had enough strength, he could only follow the will of the heavens. Now, he only hoped that the Sky Demon Army could give him enough help so that he could get rid of this puppet status as soon as possible. At the very least, he had to have enough strength to wrestle with him before the system reacted, so that he would not have everything taken away from him in an instant. Chapter 527. They're here. Zhang Xiuzhu, who was half squatting on the ground, slowly stood up and tightened his right hand on the handle of his gun. He then growled, "Prepare for battle." Countless footsteps were heard. It was as if the entire ground was trembling under the charge of an unknown number of enemy troops. He knew that he shouldn't have fought this battle. Shen Linjun's reserve forces had set up ambushes on the road from the defensive line of Donglin City to the Frost Mirror Cavalry camp. There was almost no better situation than this for the entire northern frontier. A few charges and hundreds of lives would have been lost, and they would have been able to return to the defensive line of Donglin City. They would have been able to use the mouths of those Frost Mirror Cavalry generals to direct their hatred to the Shenwu dynasty. However, everyone had their own selfish motives. Zhang Xiuzhu knew very well that this was the biggest opportunity he had so far. As long as he could win this battle, he would be able to make a name for himself. When the punishment from the king's residence at the northern frontier came, he would not be killed no matter what. There were only two possible outcomes. The first would be to lead the army to wipe out the Frost Mirror Cavalry and Shin Lin Jun's reserve forces that were spreading throughout the northern territory. The second would be to remove him from the southern expedition and have him form a new army to defend the border. He would have to suffer the consequences of not being able to kill the Shuangjian dynasty. Clang, clang. The elite soldiers behind the fortifications quickly got up and aimed their strange-looking crossbows at the charging enemy troops. They then pulled the trigger. One deadly bolt after another was fired. It took only an instant for nearly 10,000 bolts to take down a large number of enemy troops. As expected, the soldiers from Shen Lin Jun's reserve forces removed all identifiable symbols from their bodies and wore only white undergarments. Without armor, there was no way they could have withstood the bolts with just a few layers of cloth in their bodies. Furthermore, the crossbows in their hands were anything but ordinary. Those were repeating crossbows that had been painstakingly researched by the Ministry of Works of the Northern region, capable of firing all 30 bolts stored in the crossbow box within a single second. Even sturdy armor might not have been able to withstand 30 consecutive shots. Even the airborne realm warriors, who were shielding their bodies with spiritual chi, ended up with blood splattering all over their bodies. However, this kind of crossbow could be said to be a single-use item. Without a special method, it was impossible to remove the crossbow case. Forcibly removing the crossbow case would only cause part of the mechanism to self-destruct, and the entire crossbow would be destroyed. On the fierce battlefield, without enough logistical support, the emptied crossbows could only be thrown aside, waiting to be picked up when the battlefield was cleaned up to see if they could be used again. Zhang Xiuzhu had emptied all the crossbows he had brought with him in the first round of attacks. He did not consider the problem of suppressing the enemy after that. He wanted to deal the greatest blow when the enemy was unprepared. As it turned out, Zhang Xiuzhu's crazy strategy was indeed successful. After a round of firing, at least 800 of the enemy troops at the front were killed on the spot, and the number of those who were crippled and seriously injured was uncountable. Archers, change your equipment. The shooting position must be used again within 5 breaths. Zhang Xiuzhu called out. Then he waved his hand and growled, "Swordsmen and shield-bearers, what are you waiting for? Do you have to suffer another round of attacks before you know how to build a second defensive position with shields? In a team of more than 2,000 people, there was no need for semaphore or heralds. With Zhang Xiuju's cultivation level close to the heaven's strength realm, he could make all the soldiers hear his orders with his voice alone. However, Zhang Xiuju's command was not slow. How could the enemy, as the most elite soldiers of the Shenwu dynasty, be easy to deal with? Almost at the same time Zhang Xiuju opened his mouth, a black rain of arrows shot out from the dense forest. Moreover, this attack was an indiscriminate attack. Not only did Zhang Xiuju and the others' defensive position, but even the wounded soldiers lying on the ground outside were also enveloped by this rain of arrows. Between soldiers, relationships were very important. Putting aside the fact that they ate and lived together, if they were injured or killed in battle, having two more brothers would increase their chances of survival. At the very least, they could ensure that their corpses would be sent back to their hometowns and return to their roots. Therefore, the moment he realized that the enemy was attacking, Zhang Xiuju originally wanted to order the whole army to press forward and temporarily abandon the defensive position to stay with the wounded soldiers outside. However, the enemy's abnormal attack made Zhang Xiuju stunned for a moment. He could only helplessly accept this loss. He waved his long spear and swept away the arrows that were shot at him. He no longer had the leisure to take care of his other comrades. At the same time, Zhang Xiuju became more and more certain that this Xin Linjun reserve army had reached a stage of desperation. Now, other than killing all the enemies and taking away the supplies for a meal, they did not have any other thoughts. They also did not care about the friendship between comrades. They did not have any food or medicine. Therefore, from the beginning, these wounded soldiers were treated as dead people by them. Puff! In the blink of an eye, a sharp arrow shot into Zhang Xiuju's shoulder. Zhang Xiuju staggered back 2 steps. He glanced at the soldiers who were in a daze and roared, "Swordsmen and shield soldiers, withstand the arrow rain and build a defensive position. Archers, quickly get into position and prepare to counterattack. What the hell are you waiting for? Are you waiting for the enemy to finish shooting?" Before the two sides engaged in hand-to-hand combat, the archers on both sides usually shot at each other. In fact, who was at a disadvantage and who was at an advantage actually depended on the shooting accuracy and shooting frequency of the two troops. If they could suppress the enemy behind the defensive fortifications and not dare to show their heads, they could almost achieve 0 casualties and cause a very terrible blow to the enemy. But what were his subordinates doing? Hiding behind the supply wagons and trembling? Strictly speaking, compared to the elite troops of the Southern Expedition, Xin Linjun's reserve troops had only practiced a few more times and their general cultivation was higher. However, their battlefield experience was not as good as the soldiers of the Southern Expedition. However, in this first round of combat, the gap between the two sides immediately became obvious. The reason for this was very complicated. The most obvious reason was that Zhang Xiuju lacked reputation and military achievements. Even if Zhang Xiuju stirred up the morale of the whole army, he himself was just a team leader of the Southern Expedition. If it were not for Li Zhongxing's favor, many of the people present would have higher military ranks than Zhang Xiuju. Moreover, Zhang Xiuju had done almost nothing before except for his good performance in the military academy of the northern frontier. On the other hand, even if the opponent was only a reserve soldier, he was still a reserve soldier of the first army of the Shenwu dynasty. When the two sides met, the gap in confidence between the two sides was obvious. Although the morale of one side was low, there was no way to retreat. They could only fight with all their might. Their morale was indeed good, but they did not have the confidence to win. Therefore, the moment they made a mistake, it was easy to be beaten like an ostrich. Chapter 528. A pair of sharp eagle eyes lit up. Xiao En quietly watched the battlefield 3 kilometers away, the corners of his mouth slightly raised. This motley crew of Southern Expedition actually had the guts to challenge Xin Linjun's reserves. This was something that Xiao En couldn't figure out. What he couldn't figure out even more was why Zhang Xiuju's overconfident behavior could attract the attention of the Dragon King. Dragon King even asked him to personally lead the troops to back up this young general. Furthermore, Dragon King also asked him not to intervene in the battle before the other side completely collapsed. This was to let this guy suffer a big loss, but at the same time, to protect him from death. It seemed that Dragon King intended to put this young general in an important position. Xiaowen's eyes flashed. He reached out and pressed down on the composite bow raised by a guard beside him. He gently shook his head and said, "Now is not the time for us to enter the game. Let's see what other countermeasures he has." He didn't believe that the general favored by the Dragon King was just an embroidered pillow. After all, Lin Yuan's vision had always been good. As long as someone was personally appointed by him to a certain position, they would be able to do their job with ease. Occasionally, they would even be able to create some unexpected surprises. The personal guard helplessly put down the composite bow in his hand and smiled bitterly. "Big brother, you saw it too. That troop was beaten so badly that they couldn't even raise their heads in the first round. According to the fighting rhythm of the archers, if they can't organize an effective resistance to suppress the enemy's offensive within 5 minutes, they will all be shot into sieves." Xiaowen's troops were almost all of the Tree Elf tribe's demi-human warriors. As Lin Yuan's most proficient archers, the experience of these tree elves told them that the friendly forces at the front had completely collapsed. If they couldn't stop the effective resistance in time and suppress the enemy, then they could only find an opportunity to abandon a portion of their troops and retreat. In that case, it would only be a matter of how much they would lose. But if these guys continued to hide there recklessly, once Shen Linjun's reserves in the jungle attacked them, they would probably be completely wiped out. Thinking of this, the guard helplessly nudged Xiaowen with his shoulder and said, "Big brother, we are all brothers. Tell me, do you have a grudge against that guy who is leading the troops? As long as you nod, we will find an opportunity to kill him with an arrow. It's better than the friendly forces at the front being completely wiped out." But Xiaowen slapped the guard on the back of his head and said fiercely, "Dragon King's order, before the friendly forces at the front are completely defeated, not to intervene in the battle situation." "Do you want me to violate the order?" Speaking of this, Xiaowen paused, and the light in his eyes flickered. He chuckled and said, "Besides, you also know that this troop still has the opportunity to counterattack and even seize the initiative, which means that they haven't completely collapsed. Before that, you stay here obediently and don't act rashly. Otherwise, if the Dragon King is angry, no one will be able to save our heads." The personal guard grimaced and rubbed the back of his head. However, his face was filled with an unconvinced expression. He said in a deep voice, "Then I will see if Big Brother is wrong. However, I will say this first. If I am wrong, I will do whatever Big Brother says in the future. Even if you want me to die, I will not frown. But Big Brother, if you are wrong, you will have to give me a troop and let me lead the troops alone." In his opinion, whether it was stealth or archery, he was better than his big brother. And his big brother's advantage was only that he had joined the Dragon King's service earlier. Towards the Dragon King whom he had never met, he was even more like a loyal dog. He had no doubt that if the Dragon King wanted his big brother to die, his big brother would not even frown. Even the general in front of him who was beaten to the point of being unable to fight back had a better future than his big brother in his eyes. After all, the northern frontier was surging like a storm. In such a situation, only wild wolves could have a bright future. And a loyal dog like his big brother who only knew how to wag its tail and beg for mercy, other than getting some leftovers, would sooner or later be eaten by the wolves. Xiaowen was silent for a moment. His complicated gaze lingered on the guard for a moment before he nodded gently. He was clear about his younger brother's thoughts, but he was even more clear about the Dragon King's temperament. Obediently following the Dragon King, as long as the Dragon King gave him something and did not fight for what he wanted, he could live for a long time and protect the legacy of his bloodline. As for those who disobeyed the Dragon King, even if they could be put in an important position for a while, in the end, they would only end up in a situation where the cunning rabbit was killed and the lackey cooked. He was different from his younger brother, or it could be said that he was different now. Xiaowen, who had been captured and enslaved by the humans in the early years, had lost most of his wild nature. Xiao En valued the survival of the entire tree elf tribe more than his own future, so he was willing to be a loyal dog. As for his younger brother, although Xiao En did not mind letting him roam his own world, he still needed more training. He did not ask for him to become outstanding, but at least he did not want to bring disaster to the entire tribe. On the other side, Zhang Xiuzhu frowned slightly, his face gloomy to the extreme. He was very clear that the enemy's close combat troops were about to approach. If he could not set up an effective firing position, the entire army would be wiped out. Even if he was lucky enough to survive, this defeat would be nailed to the pillar of shame. Not to mention leading an army in the future, even the southern expedition would not tolerate a guy like him who only knew how to talk on paper. I'll say it one last time, prepare to counterattack. Those who disobey will have their entire family wiped out. Zhang Xiuzhu threw away the spear in his hand and rolled away to avoid a cluster of arrows. He then picked up a bow from a corpse. His movements were as quick and violent as a cheetah. He drew his bow and shot 3 arrows in a row. Suddenly, several muffled groans resounded in the jungle. At this moment, Zhang Xiuzhu completely forgot about the demeanor of a scholarly general. He, who did not have any achievements or glory, did not need those superficial things. If he wanted these soldiers to listen to him obediently, he must let them know what fear was, and what the consequences of disobeying orders were. Stop King pretending to be dead. Stand up and counterattack. Otherwise, we will all die here. Yu Dingchen, who was also struggling to resist the rain of arrows, wiped the sweat off his forehead and picked up a trembling soldier. Then, he swung the sharp blade in his hand and chopped off a big head in an instant. He sneered, "Everyone here knows that I am an Imperial Guard, and you all know that your name and background information have been recorded by us. Do I need to repeat the consequences of disobeying orders?" Chapter 529. Yu Dingchen did not come from a military background, so he was unfamiliar with how to boost morale. He did not know what to do next. However, as the Qianhu of the Imperial Guards, Yu Dingchen's mentality resonated with Zhang Xiuzhu's to a certain extent. Furthermore, he knew that if the situation continued to deteriorate, all of them would die. As such, he immediately cheered himself up and began to supervise Zhang Xiuzhu. There was no need to mention the status of the Imperial Guards and the Demon Emperor's Association in the northern frontier. They were ruthless people who could kill an entire family with a single thought. Furthermore, the more they went against such organizations, the more dirt they would dig out, and the more gruesome their deaths would be. More people would be implicated. Now that Li Zhongxing's favorite student had gone all out and the Imperial Guards were helping him, the ostrich-like soldiers could no longer keep up the act. They began to tremble and began to follow Zhang Xiuzhu's orders to build a defensive line and prepare for a counterattack. Coupled with the experts who came out with Zhang Xiuzhu and the Knight General Frost, who had his wounds treated, they were able to rebuild the defensive line in just a few minutes. The two armies began to shoot at each other, fighting for the initiative. While Shen Linjun's reserve troops had excellent shooting skills, the Southern Expedition's troops were well equipped. After seeing that their enemies were either killed or injured by their arrows, the morale of the Southern Expedition's troops was greatly boosted. They were able to suppress the reserve troops of the Southern Expedition in the jungle. After all, fighting was a physical activity, especially in such a life-and-death battle. If one had 10% of their strength, they would not dare to use only 90%. As such, the rhythm of shooting at each other only lasted for about 10 minutes. Even the airborne realm soldiers were sweating profusely and panting as they sat on the ground. They no longer had the strength to draw their bows and knock their arrows. This was the time it took for the Southern Expedition soldiers to take turns to shoot at the enemy. Therefore, at this moment, almost 80% of the soldiers had completely lost their strength. Even if the enemy rushed in front of them, they did not have the ability to stand up and fight. As for the Shen Linjun reserves in the forest, they had not eaten properly for several days, so they did not have much physical strength left. How could they withstand this level of consumption? In this short 10 minutes, the first 3 minutes were still shooting at each other, But in the next 7 minutes, it was almost like the southern expedition was crazily shooting arrows into the forest. There was no sound for a long time. Zhang Xiuzhu was silent for a moment before he silently pulled out the arrow from his shoulder. He called for a medic to treat his wound. Feeling the burning pain in his shoulder, he grimaced and roared, "Brothers, do you see this? You guys aren't any worse than those scum. As long as you dare to fight with them, you will realize that dregs will always be dregs, and we are fierce tigers." All the soldiers looked at Zhang Xiuzhu in a daze. No one cheered and no one echoed. It wasn't just because they didn't have the strength. It was also because Zhang Xiuzhu's decision was to use the lives of their entire families to threaten them into going to war. After all, only one of them would die in battle, and there would even be pensions for their families. However, once this military order was carried out by the imperial guards, the three tribes who feared war would no longer be just empty words. No one would like such a general, even if he led them to a battle that they could not win. No one would think about whether they were wrong, because this was the deep-rooted bad habit of human beings. "Medic, come forward and treat the wounds of our brothers. The rest of you, prepare to eat, then rest and recover your strength. Those who still have strength, come with me to see if there are any wounded soldiers who are still alive. Behead them and let them know the consequences of being our enemy." After the voice fell, Zhang Xiuzhu picked up his long spear again and stepped out of the camp. Although he had long been mentally prepared, he still felt a big difference when he was suddenly treated coldly by his own soldiers. Yu Dingchen sighed softly and quickly caught up with Zhang Xiuzhu. He reached out and patted him on the shoulder and said in a deep voice, "I remember this saying is from the first lesson of the military academy. Although I am a layman, I don't think you did anything wrong. In that situation, if you gave up on these people and chose to break out, their families would have lost their sons, husbands, and fathers. It would be 100 times worse than now. I believe they will understand you sooner or later." "I know." Zhang Xiuzhu nodded slightly, and his eyes glowed again. He smiled and said, "Thank you for what you did before. If you didn't reveal your identity, they would still have ignored my words." He had long known what it meant to be merciful, not to say that all generals were cruel and bloodthirsty, but a cruel fact that all leaders had to accept. If you didn't have enough strength, background, and reputation to convince your soldiers that as long as they strictly followed your orders, they would be able to obtain the final victory. Then, no matter how well you planned and how well you prepared, as long as the enemy found a flaw in your plan, the morale of your soldiers would drop, and they would become lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Those famous generals who could devise strategies and determine victory from thousands of miles away did indeed exist. However, they had earned their fame through countless battles. As the soul of an army, they only needed to tell their subordinates that victory was inevitable. Even if all the soldiers on the front lines were killed, the soldiers behind them would think that it was a necessary sacrifice before victory. Then, they would continue to charge forward and fight. The situation is settled. The light in Shaoan's eyes slowly faded, and his eyes returned to their original state. He smiled at the guard beside him. The guard waved his hand in annoyance, but he didn't say anything unpleasant. He didn't understand how the army that had been beaten by the enemy a moment ago, and didn't even dare to fight back, suddenly became fierce and defeated the enemy in the dense forest. "Put. Shaoan reached out and patted the guard's shoulder. He smiled and said, "I will continue to lead people here to clean up the enemy. You lead the cavalry and quickly bypass here. Go to the barracks at the other end of the dense forest and pass down the order. Let them launch a general attack. Be sure to kill all the Frost Mirror cavalry in the camp before sunrise tomorrow. In addition, remember to let them put on Shun Lin Jun's reserve armor for the fallen brothers." He paused and then slowly said, "I know you look down on me, and I'm too lazy to argue with you. I also know you want the opportunity to lead the army alone, and I can give it to you. But I hope you will use your brain more, and think about the consequences before you make a decision. Even if you don't think for yourself, you have to think for the people in the tribe, for your father, for your brothers and sisters." Chapter 530. After the battle ended, Zhang Xiuzhu didn't press the attack. Instead, he used the excuse of correcting the troops to reject Mount Frost's request to depart immediately. After the battle, Zhang Xiuzhu calmed down and thought about many things. The most important point was that the troops that were supposed to ambush them didn't show up at all. However, since they were patrolling nearby, they must have realized that there was a battle going on here. Yet they didn't help. Obviously, they had received some special orders. Based on this, Zhang Xiuzhu quickly realized that Dragon King was watching his every move. Even the casualties of this battle had been sent to the northern frontier through the intelligence agency. Since he had achieved his goal, Zhang Xiuzhu didn't forget what his mission was. So he stopped. It would take time to completely wipe out Mount Frost's cavalry, and he could only try his best to buy as much time as possible. Phew! After letting out a long breath, Zhang Xiuzhu put his hands behind his head. His eyes shone with an obscure light. Yu Dingxin, who had changed into a white Kirin uniform, opened the tent flap and walked to Zhang Xiuzhu's table. He put a bowl of steaming rice on it and said with a smile, "They said that you've been staying in your tent since you came back. You haven't even eaten. Now that you're the commander-in-chief, you can't fall here before the mission is completed." Zhang Xiuzhu looked at the big bowl in front of him and squeezed out a stiff smile. He looked up at Yu Dingxin and asked, "Actually, I don't understand. As a Qianhu of the Imperial Guards, why did you give up the safety of the rear and willingly stay in the southern expedition as a pawn after delivering the order from the northern frontier king?" "Because the southern expedition is short of manpower." Yu Dingxin pulled a chair over and casually sat in front of Zhang Xiuzhu. He smiled and said, "I'm a layman in the military, but you're also a spy. Do you know what it means to punish a Qianhu?" That was the most disliked position in the entire embroidered uniform guard, because once a criminal was caught, I would be in charge of interrogating them. If I couldn't get anything out of them, then all the blame would fall on me. Therefore, in order to ensure that I can keep my clothes and my life, I have to resort to any means. I have to be covered in blood every day. At this point, Yu Dingxin smiled and continued, "It's a pity that I managed to get something out of them. The credit belongs to the higher-ups and has nothing to do with me. And the benefits that the families of the prisoners sent over also belong to the Nanjing Discipline Commission and have nothing to do with me. I worked hard and got scolded. In the end, I didn't get anything good." Zhang Xiuzhu didn't reply. Instead, he focused on eating, but his gaze stopped on Yu Dingxin's face. Yu Dingxin stretched and smiled. "Right now, there's war everywhere in the north. As long as you can risk losing your head and travel to various battlefields to deliver information, even if you're an unorganized spy of the embroidered uniform guard, you'll be promoted to Qianhu after the war is over. Those Qianhu who were originally on the same level as me can even become commanders and personally lead a guard. They'll become people with real power on the northern frontier. Only I'm a Qianhu now, and I'll most likely still be a Qianhu after the war is over." As he said this, a hint of loneliness appeared in Yu Dingxin's eyes. To be able to quickly rise from the grassroots to become a Qianhu in the early days of the embroidered uniform guard, there was naturally no problem with Yu Dingxin's ability. It was just that he had offended some people and was assigned to a Qianhu with few benefits. Unless he handled some major case that alarmed the Dragon King, he would never have a chance to make a name for himself in this life. The entire embroidered uniform guard is in operation, and almost everyone has been sent out. That's why I was able to get this opportunity to go to Donglin City to deliver the decree of the king of the northern frontier. But what can this little merit do? That's why I don't want to go back. I want to stay on the southern expedition and continue to play my role in the following battles. When it's time to award merit, I want to be a commander." At this point, Yu Dingxin rubbed the tip of his nose and said with a smile, "I just didn't expect that my first mission after joining the Southern Expedition Army would be to escort supplies with you and encounter such a dangerous situation. That's why I have to thank you. If you hadn't suddenly acted so ruthlessly, all of us would have died here. Then, you can come with me." Zhang Xiuzhu swallowed the last grain of rice and looked at Yu Dingxin with shining eyes, as if he was looking at a rare treasure. Yu Dingxin raised his eyebrows again and looked at Zhang Xiuzhu with a blank expression. Today, Zhang Xiuzhu really wasn't a big shot in the southern expedition. Without any merit, even if he had Li Zhongxing's favor, he was just a team leader. Whether it was status or experience, he couldn't compare to a Qianhu of the embroidered uniform guard. But now, Zhang Xiuzhu was asking him to follow him with a smile on his face? The king of the northern frontier and Dragon King should know about our every move today. After this battle, whether it's a reward or a punishment, I won't stay on the southern expedition's list anymore. I think the higher-ups will allocate a part of the southern expedition to form a new army for me. I don't know where I'll be assigned to, but I'll most likely replace Marshal Li's current position to build the Great Wall Project and guard the border. Since you can't make a name for yourself in the embroidered uniform guard, why don't you transfer to follow me? Zhang Xiuzhu put the bowl back on the table and asked with a serious face. Yu Dingshan's expression changed several times. After a while, he slowly raised his eyelids and smiled bitterly. I think you overestimate me. I told you that I'm a complete layman in the military. If you want to entrust me with important tasks, I'm afraid it won't work. Zhang Xiuzhu tapped his fingertips on the table and stared at Yu Dingshan. He said in a deep voice, "When do you think the embroidered uniform guard and the Association of the Demon Emperor will have a winner? Even if one side doesn't die, at least there should be a male and female side, right?" Yu Dingshan's breathing stopped slightly, and his eyes began to flicker. It wasn't a secret that the two major spy agencies in the northern frontier didn't get along, but other than Sherdong and Luo Su, no one dared to mention it openly. At most, they would fight openly and secretly. Therefore, Zhang Xiuzhu's behavior could be described as crazy. If they can't be separated, even if they can be separated by force, the conflict will erupt again. Maybe in 10 years, maybe in 100 years. Zhang Xiuzhu abruptly stood up from his seat and said with a smile, "I've always been bold, so I've decided to be bold again this time. But I need your help, as well as a group of professional spies to carry out this plan for me." Chapter 5:31. The next day, early in the morning, Zhang Xiuzhu led the supply troops and set off once again. However, the troops that originally had more than 2,000 people had been reduced to less than 1,000 after the previous day's battle. Many of the supplies that had been sent over had been torn apart by arrows or sharp blades, causing their packaging to be scattered. Zhang Xiuzhu and his men had no interest in picking up the dusty grains. After calculating the number of supplies left, they sent a group of sentries into the forest. After receiving a signal confirming that the convoy was safe, Zhang Xiuzhu and his men escorted the convoy into the forest. The forest had been filled with danger yesterday, but it was empty today. I have a bad feeling about this. Keijua's eyes flashed with worry as he rode on his horse. It wasn't that he couldn't understand why Zhang Xiuzhu wanted to rest for a night before setting off. After all, the convoy was already exhausted after the bloody battle. Moreover, in order to deal with Shen Linjun's reserve forces, Zhang Xiuzhu had to abandon his persona and order the soldiers to fight. If he continued to ignore the soldiers' opinions and continued to transport the supplies, it was very likely that a mutiny would occur. Therefore, even the Frost Mirror Cavalry didn't urge Zhang Xiuzhu to set off. Although they weren't so tired that they didn't want to move, they were still exhausted. If there was a mutiny, they wouldn't even be able to run out of the simple fortifications. But for the entire night, Kaifan had felt uneasy, as if something big had happened. This uneasy feeling only turned into fear and confusion when Keijua and his men arrived at the original encampment of the Frost Mirror Cavalry. This was because the place was already in a mess. There were mutilated corpses everywhere. Most of them were the corpses of the Shuangjian dynasty's cavalrymen and horses. The rest of the corpses weren't wearing any armor, just like the enemies they encountered in the forest. Moreover, the wounds on the corpses were clearly caused by the Shuangjian dynasty's scimitars. Kei Tan couldn't think of anyone other than Shen Linjun, who was as famous as Shuel Yao cavalryman, who didn't wear an inch of armor and directly collided with the scimitars and hooves of the Frost Mirror cavalrymen. Moreover, he was able to achieve such a tragic result on both sides. Because they had never fought against the army of the northern frontier head-on, the only close contact they had was yesterday. He had witnessed with his own eyes how his team of over 2,000 was suppressed by the enemy's counterattack and couldn't even raise their heads in the fortifications. From that moment on, the Northern Frontier Army had nothing to do with elites in K Ming's eyes. They were just a bunch of cowards with nothing but strength. Cowards didn't have the guts to charge into the Frost Mirror cavalry formation in such a state. Zhang Xiuzhu's eyes narrowed slightly. His voice was somewhat bitter as he said, "It seems that those fellows we met yesterday were not simply coveting the supplies we were escorting. Their initial goal was to block our path." But K Teng's voice was choked with emotion. Why? Although they hadn't counted all the corpses in the camp, a rough estimate put the total number of corpses on both sides at around 200,000 to 300,000. If they counted the men and horses that had died at the hands of the Northern Frontier Army and the warriors that had been devoured by the demon beasts in the forest, even if there were still survivors, there would only be a few tens of thousands of them left. The number of tens of thousands was just wishful thinking on his part. It was obviously unrealistic to expect the Shuangjian dynasty to pay a huge price for an army that had been crippled or even destroyed. Yesterday, K Tan was still contemplating whether he should stand on the side of the Shuel Yao tribe or maintain his position and stand on the side of the allied army formed by the other tribes. However, the scene in front of him mercilessly slapped him in the face. Now, he had no choice. The Shuangjian dynasty has a strong military force. 500,000 cavalrymen won't be a serious injury to your dynasty, but the number of casualties will be divided among the tribes, which is still an unacceptable loss. Moreover, I can be sure that the cavalrymen that entered the Northern Frontier Army were definitely the nobles of the Shuangjian dynasty. After all, in your opinion, compared to your old enemy, the Shenwu dynasty, even if our newly risen Northern Frontier Army has unlimited potential in the future, it is just a soft persimmon that is easy to pinch and eat. Therefore, as long as they have the slightest bit of connections, they will join the troops that plunder the Northern Frontier Army instead of running to the Central Plains to deal with the unpredictable Shenwu dynasty. Yu Dingshan didn't hide his words at all. His bloody tone revealed a bit of disdain as he said coldly, "I can see that the Shenwu dynasty army naturally won't turn a blind eye to this. Young chieftain, do you think that the tribes of your dynasty will just let the deaths of 500,000 Frost Mirror Barbarian in the Northern Frontier Army be? But we have already planned to negotiate for peace. There is no need. Even if the leaders of those tribes are dissatisfied, they will give face to the Great Khan and won't start a war with the Northern Frontier Army." Kage seemed to find it hard to accept this fact. He shook his head bitterly and his voice was choked with sobs. Yu Dingshan sneered and added, "It is because there is no need that they deliberately did this. Shen Linjun's reserve troops have been defeated by us. Unless the Shenwu dynasty has the ability to settle the trouble between the Qingjiang dynasty and Yu in an instant and send troops to the Northern Frontier Army, it will be possible to bring these reserve troops back to the Central Plains. However, everyone, including themselves, knows that this is impossible, so Yu Dingshan's hesitant look successfully evoked Keiju's imagination. This was because he couldn't explain this matter too directly. Otherwise, Keiju would think that the Northern Frontier Army was trying to frame the Shenwu dynasty. However, he couldn't directly say it, but Yu Dingshan could lead Keiju's thoughts in that direction through hints. These Shen Linjun's reserve troops didn't believe that they had a way to survive. Therefore, the moment they lost Wei River City, they had already become the undead of the Shenwu dynasty. Although they weren't as miserable as the remnants of the Jiao clan in name, they were actually worse off. At least the remnants of the Jiao clan could still struggle on the line between life and death, but they didn't have the slightest bit of hope. Therefore, under such circumstances, they would do something even crazier than the remnants of the Jiao clan. For example, they would drag the 500,000 Frost Mirror cavalry down with them. Keiju was right. If both sides insisted on negotiating for peace, then this kind of action would be meaningless. However, the Frost Mirror Khan was already old and frail, and no longer had the heroic spirit he once had. Although he sat firmly on the throne of the Great Khan, Everyone could see that the other tribes on the grasslands were eyeing the Bloodsill tribe covetously. Once that lion died, the entire Bloodsill tribe would be eaten up. Chapter 5:32. Under such circumstances, how much power did the so-called Frost Mirror Khan have to say anything? 500,000 nobles from the Shuangjian dynasty had died at the northern frontier. If most of the tribes were clamoring for war with the northern frontier, the Frost Mirror Khan would have no choice but to fight against Lin Yuan even if he didn't want to. Therefore, it was reasonable for the reserves of Shin Lin Jun to attack the Frost Mirror cavalry. As people who were doomed to die, trading one life for one life with the northern frontier was undoubtedly the best choice for them. Even though the Shin Lin Jun reserves weren't the ones who did this. Even though Zhang Xiuzhu and Yu Dingchen were both under the watch of Kei Yan and the others. However, at this critical juncture of the war, the cooperation between the Genie Guards and the Shifter Emperor was undoubtedly extremely terrifying. Therefore, they were very clear about what had happened here last night and who had died here. The Shen Lin Jun reserves that had been hiding in the forest last night were just a group of defeated soldiers who had accidentally wandered here. They were a very helpful chess piece to Lin Yuan's plan. However, Zhang Xiuzhu's determination to fight almost ruined Lin Yuan's plan. After all, if Zhang Xiuzhu really won, the supply troops would have no excuse to delay and would have no choice but to march forward. When the two sides met, the Frost Mirror cavalry would be full of energy after a full meal. They wouldn't even need to wait for the northern frontier to negotiate with the Shuangjian dynasty. They would be able to follow the route the supply troops took and meet up with the main force. Although the Shuangjian dynasty wouldn't have the guts to pay the northern frontier a little less ransom, if that happened, Lin Yuan's plan would fall apart. After all, a wolf that hadn't been beaten would still be eyeing the northern frontier covetously. The tribes that hadn't suffered a loss wouldn't ignore the Great Khan's order to make up for their losses. They wouldn't let their men rush into the central plains and the south of the Shenwu dynasty to plunder. Fortunately, Zhang Xiuzhu had overestimated himself. He had also overestimated this group of elites who had been honed on the battlefield. Zhang Xiuzhu had the advantage of striking only after the enemy had made the first move. Although he had barely defeated the enemy's greed for the supply troops, he had also lost the ability to continue marching. Because Kei Teng had personally experienced that battle, he knew that the performance during the battle was not something that could be achieved by putting on a show. Although the enemy in the forest did not reveal their identity, they had jumped straight to the point that they were werewolves. This was because in the north, there was only one army that dared to intercept the supply troops of the northern frontier and had sufficient combat power. The Frost Mirror cavalry that were restricted by the terrain could only defend the plains. They did not dare to enter the forest to fight. Therefore, a great path of survival was right beside them. They did not have the courage to explore it. They could only hide in the camp and wait for a slow death. Therefore, at this point in the show, as long as the defeated army was not captured alive by Kei Teng and his men, the Shen Lin Jun reserves would be like yellow mud falling into their pants. Even if it wasn't H*T, it would still be H*T. There was no need for Yu Dingchen and Zhang Xiuzhu to guide them. No matter what happened next, Kei Teng would lock the identity of the enemy as the Shen Lin Jun reserves. This was why the current scene was happening. At this moment, Kei Teng, who had been forced into a dead end, had a gloomy expression on his face. He directly placed his hatred on the Shen Lin Jun reserves. This was not because Zhang Xiuzhu's plan was good. It was because the enemy had given him a godly assist. It was as if the heavens were helping him. As for the survivors, that was even more impossible, because the Shen Lin Jun reserves in the forest were not withdrawn at all. Last night, Xiao En and his tree elf guards sneaked into the camp and slit their throats with short knives. Not to mention leaving behind corpses, they even cleaned up the blood stains. After all, they were fighting in the forest at night. Even if the regular army of the Divine Forest Army came back, they wouldn't be able to compete with these demi-human warriors. This was especially true for the agile tree elves who were good at stealth and assassination. Because of Xiao En's outstanding performance, In the eyes of Kei Teng and the others, Zhang Xiuzhu had made a wrong inference from the beginning. The defeated Shen Linjun reserves did not come for the military supplies at all. Their purpose was to occupy the forest and block the military supplies to buy time for their comrades who were fighting with the Frost Mirror Cavalry. After the mission was over, these Shen Linjun reserves did not even collect the corpses and hurriedly retreated, leaving behind a mess on the ground. Kei Teng swallowed his saliva and gasped for breath. 500,000 Frost Mirror Cavalry. Even if they are not completely destroyed, the remaining ones are all defeated soldiers who have been scared out of their wits. So I think they don't know that we paid a high price to redeem them. What about you guys? After he finished speaking, the rest of the Frost Mirror Cavalry looked at each other and did not know what to say. As an envoy personally appointed by the Shuangjian dynasty, Kei Teng naturally stood on the side of the Shuel Yao tribe. However, these Frost Mirror Cavalry were originally the warriors of their own tribes. They came out specifically to see how the warriors of their own tribes were doing. But when they arrived at their destination, they suddenly realized that the 500,000 Frost Mirror Cavalry had all turned into cold corpses. For a moment, their faces flushed red, and they stuttered, not knowing what to say. After all, Kei Teng had two choices, but they only had one choice. Now that they were all dead, they did not even know what to say when they returned. However, they had to admit that the 500,000 Frost Mirror Cavalry was indeed not worth the price. Instead of spending a large amount of money to buy back a batch of incomplete corpses, it was better to save the 13th prince of the Shuel Yao tribe. That way, the Shuel Yao tribe would more or less compensate them. Stop hesitating. The veins on Kei Teng's forehead throbbed as he said fiercely, Shen Linjun will not let go of any opportunity. If the 13th prince is killed by those bastards while you are hesitating, there is no need for us to go back. Let's just kill ourselves here. We don't want to drag the tribe down with us. I agree to take the 13th prince back. Seconded. After being yelled at by Kei Teng, the Frost Mirror Cavalry realized that they had no other choice. Although they really did not want the 13th prince, who was known as the #1 warrior of the Shuel Yao tribe, to return to the Shuel Yao tribe, they made the wise choice to save their own lives. After all, the 13th prince might not join forces with the 3rd prince after he returned. One of them was a scholar, while the other was a warrior. A ferocious wolf and a cunning fox would never walk side by side. When that time came, it would be time for their tribe to fight for the throne. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.